The realm of ancient Greece, a land steeped in myth and legend, often yields narratives that have profoundly shaped human understanding across millennia. These are not mere fables, but powerful accounts that have endured for thousands of years, meticulously passed from one generation to the next, much like treasured heirlooms or comforting traditions. As the clamour of the modern world recedes, these timeless stories invite contemplation, their whispers echoing through history, promising insights into a world where the extraordinary was commonplace. Indeed, there remains an undeniable enchantment in exploring these venerable narratives, which transcend geographical boundaries and time zones. They forge a unique, unspoken fellowship among those drawn to the profound wisdom and captivating drama embedded within the ancient world's tapestry. This collective fascination ushers listeners into an era when the divine frequently intersected with the mortal, when every craggy peak held an untold secret, and the very fabric of existence was imbued with supernatural forces, waiting to be unveiled. The unfolding narrative transports its audience to the heart of an ancient Greek forest, a realm where the very air, redolent with the scent of pine needles and untamed herbs, seemed to hum with primeval energy. Here the sun's golden rays struggled to penetrate the dense, verdant canopy, dappling the forest floor with shifting patterns of light and shadow. This was the hallowed ground where the initial chapter of this particular tale commences, a secluded sanctuary that mortals seldom dared to trespass, a favoured domain where the formidable goddess Artemis chose to spend her solitary days. Unlike many of her Olympian counterparts who revelled in the bustling social dynamics and opulent banquets of Mount Olympus, Artemis harboured a distinct preference for seclusion. As the revered goddess of the hunt and the fierce protector of all wild creatures, she held her privacy as sacrosanct, a principle she valued above nearly all else. While other deities engaged in elaborate feasts, intricate political manoeuvring, and dramatic disputes, Artemis found solace and purpose within the untamed wilderness, accompanied only by her loyal hunting retinue. On one specific afternoon, the goddess had pursued her quarry since the first blush of dawn. Her iconic silver bow, a symbol of her formidable prowess, shimmered faintly in the fragmented sunlight, while her disciplined pack of hunting hounds moved with silent grace through the dense underbrush at her side. Yet, as the sun ascended to its zenith, casting its most powerful rays upon the forest, Artemis yearned for a different kind of respite. Her thoughts turned to a bath, a sacred ritual. Tucked away within the deepest recesses of the forest, veiled by a natural curtain of weeping willow branches, lay Artemis's clandestine bathing pool. Its pristine waters, perpetually cool and astonishingly clear, were nourished by a subterranean spring that bubbled forth from the earth's ancient depths. The pool's floor was adorned with smooth, river-polished stones, and its periphery embraced by a verdant carpet of soft moss, creating an atmosphere so serene and hallowed it compelled even the unseen to speak in hushed tones. With practised ease, Artemis parted the trailing willow branches and entered her secluded haven. Her loyal hunting companions, the devoted nymphs who had forsaken their traditional abodes in rivers and trees to serve her, immediately set about assisting the goddess with her formidable gear. They meticulously unlaced her sturdy leather boots, gently removed her quiver, brimming with shimmering silver arrows, and carefully placed her revered bow aside. The goddess then submerged herself into the refreshing embrace of the cool water, releasing an exhale of profound tranquility. This cherished moment represented the apex of her day, a brief interlude where she could shed the mantle of a formidable Olympian and simply savour the unadorned pleasure of cool water caressing her skin after a strenuous morning spent in the chase. However, the serene tableau was poised for a dramatic disruption. Not far from this hallowed spot, a young mortal hunter named Actaeon moved through the forest with considerably less stealth and grace than the divine Artemis. Actaeon, renowned for his hunting prowess, was unfortunately less celebrated for his situational awareness. He had spent the entire morning in relentless pursuit of an exceptionally elusive deer, meticulously tracking its hoofprints ever deeper into the ancient woods. His eager hunting dogs, their senses keenly attuned, surged ahead, their noses pressed to the earth, entirely captivated by the tantalizing scent trail of their quarry. Unbeknownst to Actaeon, his relentless pursuit was leading him directly into consecrated ground. This specific expanse of the forest was sacred to Artemis, a domain expressly forbidden to mortal presence. Naturally, in the era of ancient Greece, no physical markers or warnings delineated this boundary, as one might find in a contemporary nature preserve. Yet an almost palpable aura of primordial energy, a subtle yet potent spiritual resonance, permeated the very air, a silent admonition that should have compelled any sensitive soul to retreat. Driven by the faint murmur of running water, Actaeon pressed forward, forcing his way through a particularly dense thicket of bushes. He surmised that the elusive deer he had tracked for hours might have paused to quench its thirst. A sudden telling silence had fallen over his dogs, a sure sign that they were nearing their prey. And then, with an abruptness that defied preparation, he emerged from the foliage, finding himself standing at the very precipice of Artemis's secluded bathing pool. In that singular instant, the very flow of time seemed to halt its relentless progression. There, immersed in the crystal waters, was Artemis herself, encircled by her retinue of nymphs, her gaze now fixed upon the unexpected mortal intruder with an expression of unadulterated shock. Her luminous silver eyes, initially wide with disbelief, quickly narrowed into a perilous glare. One might logically assume that Actaeon, recognizing his dire transgression, would have instantly offered profuse apologies and fled the scene. Such an action would undoubtedly have been the prudent course. Instead, he remained utterly transfixed, rooted to the spot, his gaze unwavering. Perhaps the sheer audacity of the vision rendered him immobile, or perhaps he was utterly mesmerized by the unforeseen sight of an actual goddess in her sacred, vulnerable moment. Or, conceivably, his mind struggled to reconcile the impossible reality unfolding before his very eyes. The accompanying nymphs gasped in collective horror, instinctively moving to interpose themselves between their divine mistress and the intrusive mortal. Yet their efforts proved futile. The damage was already done. Actaeon had witnessed that which no mortal was ever permitted to behold. And Artemis, the formidable goddess of the hunt and the fiercely zealous guardian of her own solitude, was consumed by an incandescent rage. It is a peculiar characteristic of the Olympian deities that their expressions of wrath seldom manifested as mere shouts or simple reprimands. Instead, they favoured punishments born of profound creativity, often poetic in their brutal irony. In this regard, Artemis proved exceptionally imaginative when confronted with those who dared to violate her sacred privacy. With a swift, decisive movement, she cupped a handful of the cool spring water. As it rested in her divine palms, the ordinary liquid began to shimmer with an ethereal, potent glow, imbued with the raw power of Olympus. Without uttering a single word, she flung the enchanted water with deliberate force directly at Actaeon's face. The divine spray struck him like a cascade of liquid starlight. For a fleeting moment, Actaeon registered only the refreshing coolness against his skin. Then a slow, unsettling transformation began to unfold within him. It was first reflected in the pool's surface, where his familiar human visage should have been. Instead, a stranger stared back, his nose elongating and darkening, his ears growing disproportionately and shifting their position to the crown of his head. Most terrifyingly, magnificent antlers, fully formed and branching, began to erupt from his very skull. A desperate cry welled within Actaeon, a futile attempt to voice an apology, to explain the accidental nature of his intrusion. Yet, when he opened his mouth, no human sound emerged. Instead, a panicked cry, the distinct bleat of a deer, escaped his throat. His hands, upon closer inspection, had ceased to be hands altogether, replaced by hard, cloven hooves. His garments, once snug, now hung loosely upon his rapidly shrinking and transforming physique. His conscious human thoughts, his very identity, remained agonizingly intact, imprisoned within a form that was now irrevocably that of a magnificent, fully grown stag. Then an even more profound terror seized his newly formed deer heart, the unmistakable sound of barking dogs. His own loyal hunting pack, alerted by the commotion of his transformation, came charging through the undergrowth to investigate. However, their keen senses failed to recognize their master, Actaeon. All they perceived was a substantial stag, an ideal quarry standing near their preferred hunting grounds. Instinctively, they reacted precisely as they were trained. Actaeon, in his animal form, attempted to communicate with them, to convey his true identity. But a stag cannot speak the language of dogs, and his once faithful companions now saw only prey where their beloved master had so recently stood. The events that followed unfolded into perhaps the most poignant and tragic segment of this entire myth. Actaeon, his human consciousness agonizingly intact yet imprisoned within the body of a deer, was forced to flee for his very life from his own cherished hunting pack. He bolted through the dense forest, his new form clumsy and unfamiliar, leaping desperately over fallen logs and weaving frantically between ancient trees. Behind him, his former companions pursued with the relentless enthusiasm they had always exhibited during a shared hunt. He ran until his newfound deer legs trembled with utter exhaustion, seeking refuge behind massive rocks and within impenetrable thickets. But as the sun began its descent, casting long, ominous shadows across the forest floor, the inevitable occurred. His own dogs finally cornered him. Concurrently, at the tranquil pool, Artemis had completed her ablutions and resumed her hunting attire. Her nymphs clustered around her, their hushed conversations still revolving around the peculiar mortal who had inadvertently trespassed upon their hallowed sanctuary. Was such an unyielding punishment truly necessary? One of the nymphs ventured to inquire softly. He appeared quite young. Perhaps his intrusion was merely an unfortunate error of being lost. Artemis, in response, retrieved her exquisite silver bow, testing its taut string with a single deliberate finger. The action produced a soft, musical thrum that resonated briefly through the hushed forest. "Privacy is a divine right," she stated with stark simplicity. "Mortals must comprehend that certain boundaries are inviolable, even if crossed by mere chance." She paused, her senses attuned to the distant murmurs of the ancient woods. From afar, the triumphant barking of dogs reached her ears. She understood its grim implication. Moreover, she appended, her voice perhaps carrying a subtly softer inflection than before, he was a hunter. He intimately understood the intricate dance between predator and prey. Now he has been granted the unique, albeit tragic experience of understanding both roles. As twilight deepened and enveloped the forest in its shadowy embrace, Artemis and her retinue vanished seamlessly into the inky depths between the ancient trees, leaving behind only the gentle murmur of the bubbling spring and the sibilant whisper of the wind through the willow branches. Yet the tale leaves an indelible impression, prompting profound contemplation. Was Artemis's retribution solely a defense of her inviolable privacy, or did a more profound, perhaps even cosmic design underpin this tragic event? In the ancient world, it was widely held that the gods frequently employed severe lessons to impart crucial truths to mortals, often concerning the fundamental principles of respect, the sanctity of boundaries, and the inescapable repercussions of one's actions. The fate of Actaeon himself remains a subject of historical debate. Some interpretations of the myth propose that his innocence was not absolute, suggesting he may have deliberately sought out the goddess, driven by a forbidden desire to glimpse her divine form. Conversely, other accounts maintain that he was genuinely a lost hunter, an unfortunate soul who merely stumbled into the wrong place at the most inopportune moment. The enduring question persists: was Artemis's punishment justifiable, or did it exceed the severity warranted by what might have been an innocent, albeit profound, mistake? And if one were to occupy Actaeon's fateful position, would the realization of witnessing something forbidden have spurred immediate flight, or would the sheer, overwhelming awe have rendered one utterly paralyzed? These are the timeless inquiries that resonate, inviting each individual to weigh the complexities of divine justice and human frailty. The exploration of equitable retribution naturally guides one toward an even more somber narrative, one steeped in dynastic struggles, profound apprehension, and the dreadful actions individuals commit when gripped by the terror of relinquishing authority. Should the severity of Artemis's judgment upon Actaeon have seemed extreme, one might brace themselves for the chilling account of Kronos and the atrocities he perpetrated against his own progeny. This journey demands a deeper temporal descent, back to the absolute genesis of existence as conceptualized by the Hellenic forebears. This epoch predated the reign of Zeus from the majestic heights of Mount Olympus, long before the construction of hallowed sanctuaries or the emergence of metropolitan centers, indeed even prior to the very inception of humankind. During that primordial era, the terrestrial sphere was governed by formidable entities known as Titans, colossal and immensely potent beings who traced their lineage directly from the earth itself, being its immediate offspring and their descendants. The supreme sovereign among these Titans was Kronos. It is crucial to note that Kronos' ascension to kingship was not achieved through any semblance of popular suffrage or a tranquil succession of inheritance. Rather, he seized dominion by enacting a horrific deed upon his own progenitor, Uranus, employing a crescent-shaped scythe bestowed upon him by his mother. Kronos had launched a brutal assault against Uranus, orchestrating a cataclysmic overthrow that reverberated through the very bedrock of existence. One might naturally surmise that the triumphant deposition of his father would have instilled in Kronos an unshakable sense of dominion and security. Yet, the antithetical reality prevailed. Each waking moment was consumed by a gnawing anxiety that a similar fate might befall him. Every evening, as slumber approached, his mind was plagued by the unsettling contemplation of whether one of his own offspring was meticulously devising a scheme to usurp him, mirroring his own treacherous machinations against his father. Then, a fateful day arrived when Kronos was delivered a prophecy, rendering his deepest anxieties appear almost trivial in comparison. This ominous pronouncement emanated from the Fates themselves, a trio of primeval sororal figures endowed with the capacity to perceive the intricate skeins of destiny unfurling into futurity. Their message was stark, profoundly alarming and utterly unavoidable. A scion of your bloodline shall depose you precisely as you deposed your father. Typically, when individuals are confronted with disquieting revelations concerning their future, they often endeavour to modify their conduct in an effort to avert the foretold calamitous result. Such a person might resolve to cultivate more nurturing parental qualities, or to rear their offspring with an abundance of affection and a dearth of apprehension. Kronos, regrettably, opted for a far more unequivocal and brutal methodology. His reasoning dictated that if he possessed no progeny, then no child could ever rise to overthrow him. However, a significant predicament presented itself. Kronos had already entered into matrimony with his sister Rhea, a marital custom seemingly conventional among the Titan race, and she was, at that very moment, already carrying their inaugural offspring. Consequently, Kronos conceived a stratagem that was simultaneously straightforward in its conception and utterly appalling in its execution. He would permit the children to be born, and subsequently he would devour them. Envision the harrowing spectacle that unfolded upon the arrival of their firstborn, a daughter designated Hestia. Rhea, though physically depleted by the rigours of parturition, radiated the resplendent elation of a new mother, cradling her infant tenderly and gazing with a tender smile upon the minute, flawless countenance. She likely envisioned a myriad of splendid experiences she would impart to her child, the countless locales they would discover in unison, the boundless affection they would mutually cherish. It was at this poignant moment that Kronos entered the chamber. "Deliver the child to me," he commanded, his voice a profound, reverberating growl characteristic of his Titan nature. Rhea undoubtedly presumed his intention was to embrace his daughter, to bestow upon her a paternal benediction of welcome into the world. Instead, Kronos seized the infant within his colossal grasp, distended his maw to an unimaginable width, and consumed the diminutive Hestia in a single horrifying swallow. Can one truly fathom the unmitigated terror that must have gripped Rhea? Can one conjure the image of her anguished cries, her frantic, futile endeavours to intercede, her utter bewilderment at her consort's perpetration of such an abominable act? Yet Kronos merely wiped his lips with an air of grim satisfaction and departed. convinced he had neutralized at least one nascent peril to his sovereignty. The profoundly distressing aspect of this saga is that this was no isolated paroxysm of insanity. Upon the birth of their second offspring, a daughter christened Demeter, the identical gruesome event recurred. Kronos seized the infant and ingested her entirely. Subsequently arrived Hera, their third child destined for the same grim fate. Then Hades, their inaugural son, vanished in a solitary gulp, followed by Poseidon, their second male child, another swift ingestion, another infant dissolving into the cavernous maw of their paternal figure. A pertinent inquiry might now arise. Where precisely did these young deities reside once Kronos had consumed them? Were they, in fact, perishing? The response to this query is simultaneously disquieting and oddly reassuring, for Kronos, as an immortal titan, possessed an inherent indestructibility. His progeny, sharing his divine essence, were likewise immortal. Consequently, when he ingested them, their existence did not cease. Instead, they discovered themselves ensnared within his vast abdominal cavity, sentient and alive, yet confined within an interminable gloom. Endeavour to conceive the predicament of one of these children. One remains conscious, one retains cognitive faculties. One can perceive the presence of one's siblings amidst the pervasive obscurity. Nevertheless, escape is an impossibility. Maturation is denied. The exploration of the world remains an unfulfilled yearning. There is no recourse but to endure, awaiting release within the tepid, constricted confines of one's father's interior. Concurrently, Rhea's anguish intensified, her despair deepening with the loss of each successive child. She implored Kronos, beseeching him to cease his monstrous acts. She attempted to conceal herself when the pangs of labour commenced. She entreated other titans for their succour, yet Kronos reigned supreme, an unchallengeable monarch, and all were too petrified of his wrath to intervene. By the time Rhea found herself gravid with her sixth offspring, a resolute conviction solidified within her. She must undertake a radically different course of action. She could no longer countenance the sacrifice of another infant to her husband's ravenous paranoid obsession. Thus she ingeniously conceived a scheme that was at once cunningly devised and fraught with immense peril. When the auspicious moment arrived for the birth of the sixth child, Rhea deliberately refrained from returning to their customary palatial abode. Instead, she journeyed a considerable distance to a concealed cavern nestled on the verdant island of Crete. Within this secluded sanctuary, attended by benevolent nymphs who diligently muffled the sounds of her labour, she brought forth a son, whom she christened Zeus. However, rather than conveying the infant Zeus back to his paternal figure, Rhea meticulously enshrouded a substantial stone in swaddling clothes. She carefully ensured that the stone approximated the dimensions and mass of a newborn. She even adorned it with a diminutive cap, crafting an illusion that, from a distance, it would convincingly resemble an actual infant. Having completed this elaborate ruse, she then returned to her residence and presented this counterfeit child to Kronos. It stands to reason that any paternal figure would possess the discernment to differentiate between a genuine infant and a mere lithic object enveloped in swaddling. Yet it is imperative to recall that Kronos harboured no desire for fatherhood. His entire being was so utterly fixated on eradicating any prospective menace to his dominion that he never deigned to properly observe his progeny before their consumption. Consequently, when Rhea proffered the bundled deception, Kronos accepted it without genuine scrutiny, and ingested the stone in its entirety, precisely as he had devoured his 5 preceding offspring. Concurrently, the infant Zeus continued his clandestine existence within the cavern on Crete, where he was nurtured by the devoted nymphs and sustained by a diet of golden honey and the nourishing milk of a wondrous goat named Amalthea. With each passing day he burgeoned in stature and physical prowess, and with consistent regularity Rhea undertook surreptitious visits, recounting to him the plight of his siblings, imprisoned within the confines of their father's digestive tract. As Zeus matured from infancy into robust young manhood, he assimilated the full horror of his father's profound paranoia and the dreadful actions that terror had compelled him to commit. Gradually, Zeus commenced the meticulous formulation of his retribution. However, a compelling dimension that renders this narrative uniquely captivating is the multifaceted nature of Zeus's agenda. He was not merely intent on chastising his father for his inherent cruelty. His designs also encompassed the liberation of his incarcerated brethren and sisters. In stark contrast to Kronos, who perceived his offspring solely as existential threats, Zeus regarded them as integral members of his lineage, deserving of emancipation. The profound query that persistently troubled Zeus during his strategic deliberations was this: was he irrevocably fated to emulate his father's tyranny? Would the act of deposing Kronos merely transform him into yet another tyrannical sovereign, condemned to a future of fear and the eventual destruction of his own progeny? Or could he, through sheer force of will and principle, rupture the insidious cycle of violence that had passed from Uranus to Kronos, and now loomed to perpetuate itself through his own reign? What indeed propels an individual to perceive their own offspring as adversaries? Is this phenomenon solely attributable to the dread of relinquishing authority? Or does it stem from a more profound source, perhaps a rudimentary incapacity to cherish others above one's own self-preservation? Apropos of the intricate cycles of aggression and their unforeseen repercussions, our subsequent narrative unfolds with one of the most exquisitely beautiful denouements conceivable, blossoming forth from one of the most brutal acts chronicled throughout all of mythological lore. It is as if the ancient Hellenes sought to impart the wisdom that, on occasion, even dire occurrences possess the capacity to engender something truly magnificent. Does the memory linger of Kronos's decisive overthrow of his father, Uranus, executed with that distinctive curved scythe? Well, the venerable chroniclers of antiquity harboured exceptionally precise conceptions regarding the aftermath of that pivotal, violent instant. Their conviction held that when Uranus suffered his grievous injury, vital droplets of his immortal ichor descended into the vast expanse of the sea. And from that celestial fluid, commingling with the effervescent foam and saline waters of the boundless ocean, an utterly wondrous phenomenon commenced its formation. Visualize the tableau, the expansive Mediterranean Sea on a dawn so utterly tranquil that its surface shimmered like burnished obsidian. The solar orb was just commencing its ascent, meticulously suffusing the firmament with delicate hues of rose and aurum. Diminutive undulations caressed the coastline with a tender rhythm, bearing ashore the customary bounty yielded by the deep fragments of lustrous sea glass, intriguing conch shells and intricate skeins of marine flora. Yet, on this specific morning, the incoming swells transported an entity utterly unparalleled. Initially, it presented itself as mere ocean spray, the effervescent white substance that materializes when surging waves collide with rocky formations. However, this particular foam possessed an anomalous quality. It emanated a gentle, nacreous luminescence. It did not dissipate as conventional foam is wont to do. Instead, it expanded in both size and radiance as it drifted inexorably towards the littoral. And then, with an unhurried, elegant unfolding, a distinct form began to ascend from within the incandescent froth. This burgeoning entity was Aphrodite, the revered goddess of affection and aesthetic perfection, manifesting directly from the very essence of the aqueous realm. The ancient Hellenic people harboured very precise conceptions regarding the apotheosis of beauty, envisioning what the most exquisite being in all existence would embody. Aphrodite was not merely comely. She was the very essence of pulchritude made tangible, a living embodiment of aesthetic perfection. Her tresses, a cascade of radiant strands, captured the burgeoning rays of the morning sun, as if spun from pure, shimmering gold. Her complexion possessed the unblemished smoothness, the lustrous sheen of a pristine pearl. Her captivating eyes mirrored the profound, cerulean depths of the ocean on a tranquil summer's day. Yet, beyond her purely physical attributes, there emanated an ineffable quality from Aphrodite's very presence that imbued everything in her vicinity with an enhanced, almost magical beauty. The effervescent sea foam that danced around her form seemed to sparkle with the brilliance of countless diamonds. The unassuming seashells scattered at her feet were suddenly transformed into objects of precious glittering jewels. Even the gulls, soaring effortlessly overhead, appeared to navigate the skies with an unprecedented grace and elegance whenever she was near. Upon Aphrodite's inaugural descent onto the sandy shore, a wondrous phenomenon unfolded. Vibrant flora blossomed spontaneously within her very footprints. These were no ordinary blossoms, but roses, the most breathtakingly beautiful and intensely fragrant roses that any mortal or immortal eye had ever beheld. The very earth itself seemed to exult in her momentous arrival, a verdant testament to her divine grace. However, a particularly intriguing facet of this genesis lay in Aphrodite's unique birthright. She emerged fully grown, endowed with an inherent and complete comprehension of her identity and the full scope of her burgeoning powers. Unlike the nascent stages of mortal infants, who must painstakingly acquire all knowledge from inception, she instantaneously grasped her divine status and understood that her dominion encompassed love in all its myriad manifestations. And love, as Aphrodite swiftly discerned through this innate wisdom, proved to be an entity far more intricate and profound than simply engendering feelings of happiness. The initial revelation that captivated her attention was the profound impact her nascent presence exerted upon the myriad creatures inhabiting her immediate surroundings. A graceful pair of dolphins, which had been idly navigating the coastal waters, abruptly commenced an elaborate and synchronized courtship ritual, leaping and spinning through the waves with an unparalleled fluid elegance. Simultaneously, two seagulls, previously engaged in a contentious squabble over a solitary fish, inexplicably abandoned their dispute and began affectionately preening each other's feathers, their former animosity utterly forgotten. Even the plant kingdom responded with an astonishing alacrity to her pervasive influence. Vines that had been growing in divergent directions suddenly began to intertwine, their tendrils reaching out to embrace one another. Trees that had stood in solitary grandeur now subtly inclined their branches toward their nearest neighbors, as if yearning for companionship. But Aphrodite's heightened senses also detected a more melancholic undercurrent, a pervasive sense of loneliness that permeated the vast expanse of the world. In the boundless ocean stretching behind her, she could acutely perceive the isolation of countless creatures swimming in solitary splendor within the immense, silent depths. On the verdant land unfolding before her, she sensed the quiet yearning of animals and ethereal spirits who had never experienced the profound solace of genuine companionship. And most remarkably, she could even perceive the complex emotional tapestries of her fellow gods, despite never having encountered them in person. Somewhere in the distant reaches of the cosmos, she intuited Zeus's intricate and often conflicting sentiments concerning power and the weighty mantle of responsibility. She felt Hera's internal struggle, a perpetual oscillation between profound love and searing jealousy. She even perceived the inherent solitude of Artemis, who, despite actively choosing a life of independence and isolation, occasionally harbored a faint curiosity about the experiences she might be missing. It was at this critical juncture that Aphrodite formulated a momentous resolution, a decision destined to reverberate through the lives of both gods and mortals for all eternity. She determined that her sacred role would transcend merely symbolizing love. Rather, she would actively engineer and cultivate opportunities for love to blossom and flourish. Her initial endeavors were modest in scale, focusing on the creatures immediately within her sphere of influence. She subtly encouraged the lone dolphins to seek out compatible companions. She gently guided the solitary seabirds toward finding suitable mates. She even exerted a delicate influence over the ocean currents, orchestrating their flow to bring together fish that had been swimming in isolated patterns. However, as she gracefully traversed the shoreline, exploring this nascent world into which she had been divinely born, Aphrodite began to grasp that love was not invariably a straightforward, unadulterated blessing. She observed a pair of crabs engaged in a fierce territorial dispute, and realized with a dawning understanding that sometimes the powerful instinct to protect what one cherishes could inevitably lead to discord and conflict. She witnessed a mother bird aggressively repelling other avian creatures that ventured too close to her carefully constructed nest, and comprehended that love frequently encompassed elements of possessiveness and even jealousy. Most astonishingly, she discovered that her very presence could inadvertently instigate complications. When she passed by a playful pod of young dolphins, they were instantaneously captivated by her, abandoning their previous social bonds and following her with an almost hypnotic infatuation along the shore. This experience underscored the imperative for her to learn to regulate her formidable influence, to wield it with deliberate thoughtfulness rather than allowing it to indiscriminately sway everyone in her proximity. This profound realization marked Aphrodite's inaugural lesson in the weighty responsibility that inherently accompanied her immense powers. To be the revered goddess of love did not simply entail orchestrating universal adoration among all beings. Instead, it demanded an intricate understanding of the delicate equilibrium between fervent desire and profound respect, between unbridled passion and thoughtful wisdom, between uniting individuals and granting them the autonomy to forge their own destinies. As the sun ascended higher into the azure sky, Aphrodite recognized the immediate necessity of establishing her rightful place among the other deities. She had been born with the inherent knowledge that other immortal beings, each with their own distinct domains and complex personalities, existed. Yet she also understood, with an intuitive certainty, that her arrival would irrevocably alter the intricate dynamics of their established relationships in ways that no one, not even the wisest of the gods, could possibly foresee. Indeed, what unforeseen consequences might unfold when the very goddess of love materializes within a divine family, already burdened by its considerable share of convoluted relationships and ancient grievances. What ramifications might arise when a being endowed with the profound ability to influence emotions joins a pantheon of immensely powerful entities who, ironically, are not always adept at managing their own tumultuous feelings. Aphrodite stood poised at the water's edge, her gaze sweeping across the boundless sea that had given birth to her, before turning to contemplate the vast land where her new, immortal life awaited its unfolding. The gentle breeze playfully tousled her golden hair, and around her feet the miraculous roses continued their vibrant bloom. She was undeniably beautiful, immensely powerful, and eternally immortal. Yet she was also, in a deeply profound sense, entirely solitary. She was utterly unique, the sole being whose very essence was the embodiment of love itself. How, then, does one forge authentic relationships when one's mere presence automatically sways the affections and perceptions of others? How can one truly ascertain if another's devotion is genuine, or if it is merely an involuntary response to one's inherent divine nature? These were the weighty questions that Aphrodite carried within her as she took her first deliberate steps away from the nurturing embrace of the sea and toward the majestic heights of Mount Olympus, where the other gods awaited unknowingly the arrival of love incarnate. And perhaps these are precisely the same profound questions that humanity continues to grapple with even in the present era. How do we effectively balance the inherent human desire to be loved with the fundamental need to remain authentic to our true selves? How do we discern when our deepest feelings for another are truly genuine, and when they are merely a superficial reaction to transient attractions? How do we extend love to others while simultaneously safeguarding and maintaining our own unique identity? These introspective inquiries concerning identity and authenticity serve as a compelling segue, bringing us directly to one of the most terrifying and existential challenges Zeus ever confronted, a cataclysmic battle that not only tested his immense strength, but also fundamentally questioned his very legitimacy to rule the entire cosmos. For sometimes the gravest threats emerge not from the familiar spectre of familial betrayal or the intricate complications of romantic entanglements, but from forces of unadulterated chaotic destruction. By this point in the tumultuous saga of the gods, Zeus had successfully orchestrated the overthrow of his tyrannical father, Cronos, liberated his siblings from their gruesome imprisonment within their father's stomach, and firmly established himself as the undisputed king of the gods on the majestic pinnacle of Mount Olympus. One might reasonably assume that this period would afford Zeus a well-deserved opportunity to relax and savour the fruits of his hard-won victory. Instead, it was precisely at this moment that Gaia, the primordial earth herself, decided to rigorously test whether Zeus truly merited his newly claimed throne. You see, Gaia, the ancient and venerable earth, had patiently observed her children and grandchildren locked in incessant brutal conflict for countless generations. First, Uranus had inflicted cruelties upon his offspring. Then, Kronos had violently deposed Uranus in a bloody coup. Now, Zeus had, with equal ferocity, overthrown Kronos. Gaia was utterly weary of this relentless cycle of familial violence, and she was particularly incensed that Zeus had unjustly imprisoned many of her other children, the mighty Titans, within the deepest, most abyssal pit of the underworld, Tartarus. Consequently, Gaia resolved to fashion a champion, a being of unparalleled power, who could decisively defeat Zeus once and for all. Her intention was not for this new creation to ascend to power in Zeus's stead, but rather to irrevocably shatter the cycle of violent power struggles by utterly annihilating the very concept of divine kingship itself. She retreated into the most profound and secret caverns nestled deep beneath the earth's surface, where the very rock remained in a molten state, and the ambient air shimmered intensely with incandescent heat. There, within a colossal cavern illuminated solely by the infernal glow of subterranean lava streams, Gaia embarked upon her most audacious and terrifying creation to date. She meticulously gathered clay from the abyssal depths of the deepest ocean trenches, meticulously blended it with primordial fire extracted from the earth's molten core, and then, with a formidable act of will, breathed into this nascent form all of her accumulated rage, her profound frustration, and her fervent desire for an ultimate end to divine tyranny. What ultimately emerged from this harrowing process was an entity unlike anything that had ever existed before, and hopefully a horror that would never again grace existence. His name was Typhon, and he was meticulously engineered to be the perfect anti-god, a living antithesis to divine order. Imagine the most colossal mountain you have ever laid eyes upon. Now, imagine that immense geological feature possessed the terrifying capacity to move, to think, and to harbour an unfathomable hatred. Typhon was so staggeringly tall that when he fully extended his immense form, his monstrous head scraped against the celestial expanse of the stars themselves. His eyes blazed with an infernal intensity, like miniature malevolent suns. In lieu of hair, a writhing mass of venomous serpents covered his scalp, each one possessing enough deadly poison to instantly fell 100 mortals with a single, excruciating bite. But perhaps the most horrifying aspect of his grotesque form lay in his hands. From his elbows downward, instead of conventional arms and hands, Typhon possessed 100 monstrous dragon heads. Each of these serpentine heads could unleash a distinct form of destruction. Some spewed scorching fire, others emitted noxious, suffocating poison gas, while still others exhaled a freezing, glacial wind capable of instantly transforming living creatures into immobile ice statues. When Typhon first tore himself from the bowels of the earth, his mere act of standing upright caused devastating earthquakes that convulsed the entire known world. His roar, a terrifying cacophony that emanated not only from his primary mouth but also from all 100 of his dragon-headed hands, was so deafeningly loud that it shattered mighty mountains and triggered colossal avalanches thousands of miles away. The first time the mighty gods on Mount Olympus caught sight of Typhon's terrifying approach, their immediate and instinctive reaction was not to stand their ground and engage in battle. Instead, it was to flee in unbridled terror as swiftly as their divine forms would allow. And it is crucial to remember that these were the very same deities who had successfully waged war against the formidable Titans, who commanded the destructive power of lightning and earthquakes, and who even held sway over the very underworld itself. But Typhon was an entirely different category of threat. He was not merely powerful, he was chaos incarnate, destruction for its own sake, the very harbinger of the end of everything they had painstakingly constructed and held dear. One by one, the illustrious Olympian deities sought refuge in the ancient land of Egypt, where they ingeniously cloaked their divine forms in the guises of various creatures, hoping to elude the relentless scrutiny of Typhon. The radiant Aphrodite assumed the aquatic form of a fish, the sagacious Apollo transformed into a watchful crow, the agile Artemis manifested as a sleek cat. Even the formidable Ares, the very personification of war, adopted the formidable shape of a wild boar and secreted himself away in the most distant reaches of the sprawling Nile delta. Yet Zeus, the king of the gods, stood apart from his fleeing kin. He did not retreat. This steadfastness was not born of an absence of fear. Indeed, the ancient narratives unequivocally portray Zeus as utterly terrified by Typhon's monstrous might. His resolve stemmed rather from a profound understanding that eluded the others. Should he abandon this critical confrontation, allowing Typhon to lay waste to Mount Olympus and obliterate all that the gods had painstakingly constructed, then Gaia's ultimate objective would be achieved. The glorious epoch of the gods would draw to a definitive close, and the cosmos would irrevocably regress into a state of primordial, unbridled chaos. Consequently, Zeus remained, a solitary figure upon the highest pinnacle of Mount Olympus, his potent thunderbolts crackling with raw energy in his grasp, patiently awaiting Typhon's inevitable arrival. The ensuing battle, once it commenced, was a spectacle of unparalleled ferocity and devastation, unlike anything the world had ever witnessed. Zeus unleashed an incessant barrage of lightning bolts at Typhon, each incandescent flash possessing enough brilliance to permanently blind any mortal who dared to gaze upon it, and each explosive roar reverberating with such immense volume that it could be distinctly heard across the furthest reaches of the globe. Nevertheless, Typhon appeared largely unperturbed. The searing impact of the lightning strikes merely left superficial scorch marks upon his craggy, rocky hide, failing to impede his relentless advance in the slightest. Simultaneously, Typhon's formidable 100 dragon heads spewed forth a terrifying array of destructive forces upon Zeus, fire so intensely hot it could instantly liquefy solid bronze, a virulent poison that caused vegetation to shrivel and perish for miles around, and an extreme cold so profound it could instantly congeal the very air itself. Zeus was compelled to employ every ounce of his legendary speed and agility simply to evade utter annihilation within the initial moments of their cataclysmic engagement. The titanic struggle raged on, enduring for days, then stretching into weeks. The ceaseless deafening peals of Zeus's lightning and the guttural, earth-shattering roars emanating from Typhon's numerous heads coalesced to generate colossal storms that inundated entire regions, causing widespread flooding. The immense thermal energy released by their combat was so potent that it melted the snowcaps on distant towering mountains. The very crust of the earth fractured and cleaved open under the sheer, unbridled force of their colossal impacts. But gradually, imperceptibly at first, Zeus began to grasp a crucial insight. He could not hope to prevail in this conflict through sheer physical might alone. Typhon was simply too overwhelmingly powerful, too incredibly resilient, too utterly saturated with raw, destructive energy. Each fleeting instant, Zeus believed he had secured a momentary advantage. Typhon would unleash some novel and terrifying form of assault, invariably forcing Zeus back onto a desperate defensive stance. It was at this critical juncture that Zeus's memory stirred, recalling a profound piece of wisdom his grandmother Gaia had imparted to him long ago, in an era preceding their bitter enmity. She had spoken of the earth itself as an inexhaustible fount of strength, but also cautioned that this same earth could be strategically turned against those who harboured intentions of destruction rather than preservation. Consequently, instead of persisting in his direct attempts to obliterate Typhon, Zeus embarked upon an entirely different approach. He began to wield his lightning not as instruments of direct harm, but rather as precision tools. He directed his strikes at the ground surrounding Typhon, his aim not to injure the monstrous entity directly, but instead to instigate colossal rock slides and cascading avalanches. Initially, this tactic appeared utterly futile. Typhon effortlessly pulverized the torrents of falling rocks, treating them as inconsequential pebbles. Yet, Zeus persisted, maintaining his relentless bombardment, perpetually triggering landslides and tirelessly piling stone upon stone. And, ever so slowly, with agonizing gradualness, the immense accumulation of rocks began to encircle and rise around Typhon's gargantuan feet. It demanded yet another full week of unremitting lightning strikes from Zeus, but eventually he succeeded in burying Typhon up to his formidable waist in a massive accumulation of loose rock and geological debris. The monstrous entity, though still fiercely struggling and continuing to belch forth destruction from his myriad dragon heads, had been rendered completely immobile. It was then that Zeus executed his final desperate maneuver. Rather than attempting to slay Typhon, a feat that might have proven utterly impossible regardless, Zeus channeled his prodigious power over earthquakes to violently cleave open the very earth beneath the now imprisoned monster. Following this with a single lightning strike of a magnitude far exceeding any he had ever previously conjured, he brought an entire mountain crashing down upon Typhon. The colossal peak that ultimately entombed Typhon was Mount Etna, and according to the venerable traditions of the ancient Greeks, Typhon remains ensnared beneath its immense weight to this very day. Each time the volcano erupts, they recounted, it is but a testament to Typhon's enduring presence below, still seething with rage, still exhaling fiery breath, and still desperately striving to break free from his eternal prison. Yet, a particularly intriguing facet emerges from this ancient narrative. Zeus achieved victory not by virtue of superior strength over Typhon, but through the application of greater intellect. His triumph was secured by embracing patience rather than relying solely on raw power, by engaging in strategic forethought instead of merely intensifying his combat efforts. When the other gods eventually returned from their Egyptian sanctuary, discovering Zeus standing, utterly exhausted yet undeniably victorious amidst the ravaged landscape of the battlefield, they posed an urgent question. How had he managed to vanquish a foe that had instilled such profound terror in all of them? Zeus's response was remarkably straightforward. I did not conquer him by possessing greater might. I defeated him by remembering precisely what I was fighting for, and perhaps this profound lesson resonates far beyond the confines of ancient mythology. Occasionally, the most formidable challenges we encounter in our own lives cannot be surmounted by simply exerting more effort, or by becoming physically stronger. Sometimes they necessitate a pause, a deliberate step back, a period of careful contemplation, and a heartfelt recollection of what truly holds significance for us. This profound concept of remembering one's ultimate purpose now guides us to the story of one of the most celebrated heroes in the entirety of Greek mythology, and a narrative that illustrates how, at times, the most pivotal battles are waged not against overt, monstrous entities, but against the very societal structures and systems that inadvertently give rise to such monstrosities in the first place. Let us now transition from the celestial domain of the gods to the terrestrial world of mortals, journeying to the captivating island of Crete, where the esteemed King Minos reigned with notable wisdom, immense wealth, and harboured a chilling secret meticulously concealed beneath his opulent palace. This ominous secret bore the name the Labyrinth, an architectural marvel of unparalleled complexity, widely regarded as the most intricate maze ever conceived. Meticulously designed by the legendary master craftsman Daedalus, it comprised a vast subterranean network of serpentine corridors, bewildering dead ends and deceptive false passages, crafted with such ingenious confusion that any individual who ventured into its depths would inevitably become hopelessly disoriented and lost within mere minutes. And at the very heart of this bewildering labyrinth resided a being that, by all accounts, should never have been brought into existence, a terrifying creature known as the Minotaur. Indeed, the very genesis of the Minotaur's tale was in itself a profound tragedy, born of divine retribution and its dire human repercussions. King Minos had on one occasion incurred the wrath of the formidable sea god Poseidon. Poseidon's vengeful act manifested as a cruel curse, compelling Minos's wife, Pasiphae, to develop an unnatural and consuming affection for a sacred bull. From this abhorrent and unnatural coupling emerged the Minotaur, a creature endowed with the powerful physique of a man, yet cursed with the terrifying head of a bull. It possessed a chilling semblance of human intelligence, but was relentlessly driven by an insatiable, bestial hunger. King Minos, consumed by shame and horror at this constant living reminder of his family's divine curse, had subsequently commissioned Daedalus to construct the elaborate labyrinth specifically as an inescapable prison for the monstrous being. The Minotaur was thus condemned to perpetual confinement, unable to ever escape, yet paradoxically unable to ever truly die, forever denied the solace of peace, destined to remain nothing more than a tormented monster trapped in an eternal, suffocating darkness. However, the narrative plunges into an even deeper abyss of tragedy at this juncture. To satiate the Minotaur's ravenous appetite, King Minos had imposed an abominable tribute upon the venerable city-state of Athens. With a chilling regularity, every 7 years Athens was forcibly compelled to dispatch 7 young men and 7 young women to Crete. There these unfortunate youths would be thrust into the bewildering depths of the labyrinth, destined to be mercilessly hunted and devoured by the Minotaur. One can only imagine the devastating implications this mandate had for Athenian families. Every 7 years, 14 families would endure the unimaginable anguish of losing their beloved children to this horrific fate. The victims were selected through a cruel lottery system, which meant that every family with young offspring lived in a perpetual state of agonizing dread, consumed by the fear that their son or daughter might be the next to be arbitrarily chosen for sacrifice. It was into this harrowing predicament that our emergent hero, Theseus, courageously stepped forward. Theseus was, in fact, the son of King Aegeus of Athens, though he had spent his formative years far removed from the royal grandeur of the palace, having been raised by his mother in a modest coastal settlement. He had only recently arrived in Athens and consequently had only recently become aware of his noble royal lineage. Thus, when the time arrived for the third iteration of the tribute to be dispatched to Crete, Theseus was witnessing this profound tragedy unfold for the very first time. He watched with profound dismay as the 14 young Athenians were chosen by the arbitrary draw of lots. He observed their families weeping inconsolably, and he perceived the deep-seated, resigned despair etched into the very eyes of the victims themselves. He listened as the elder citizens, worn down by years of suffering, explained that this was simply the unalterable course of events, asserting that there was no conceivable benefit in attempting to defy King Minos and his monstrous creation. Yet Theseus, imbued with the unyielding idealism of youth and not yet jaded by years of passively accepting the unacceptable, posed a deceptively simple, yet profoundly challenging question. Why do we not simply refuse to send the tribute altogether? The answer, he quickly learned, lay in the overwhelming military might of King Minos's formidable navy. Should Athens dare to withhold the tribute, Minos would undoubtedly unleash his fleet, invade, and utterly decimate the city. It was argued with a chilling pragmatism that it was preferable to sacrifice 14 young lives every 7 years than to risk the complete annihilation of the entire populace. This cold, calculating logic failed to appease Theseus in the slightest. Instead, he made a startling declaration that sent shockwaves through everyone present, including his own father. He announced his intention to volunteer as one of the 14 tributes, and furthermore, he vowed that he would personally slay the Minotaur. King Aegeus was utterly aghast. He had only just been joyfully reunited with his son, and now Theseus seemingly wished to recklessly squander his life on what appeared to be an utterly impossible undertaking. Dozens of young people had already been consigned to the labyrinth over the preceding years, and not a single one had ever re-emerged. Many of these had been highly trained warriors. What then led Theseus to believe he could succeed, where all of them had so tragically failed? Theseus's profound response illuminated a crucial aspect of his character. He declared, "Perhaps I cannot ultimately kill the Minotaur, but I can ensure that I am the last person who dies trying." You see, Theseus possessed a meticulously crafted plan that extended far beyond the mere act of confronting and fighting the monstrous creature. He had diligently immersed himself in every known piece of information concerning the labyrinth, engaging in discussions with Daedalus's former apprentices, and assiduously studying its intricate construction and bewildering layout. He was firmly convinced that the true, paramount challenge was not the slaying of the Minotaur itself. The far greater hurdle, he believed, was successfully navigating the treacherous maze and escaping its clutches afterward. Consequently, when the vessel carrying the 14 tributes finally docked in Crete, Theseus was not merely equipped with conventional weaponry. He carried, discreetly in his possession, a humble ball of thread. Yet, preceding the famed stratagem of the thread, there lies a segment of this narrative frequently eclipsed. As Theseus engaged in preparations for his impending encounter with the Minotaur, his presence drew the notice of an unforeseen individual, Ariadne, the royal offspring of King Minos. Ariadne had spent her formative years steeped in the grim knowledge of the Minotaur, the periodic tribute and the tragic disappearance of youths into the labyrinthine depths every 7 years. Nevertheless, she had never before come into contact with any of these unfortunate souls. They were consistently sequestered from the royal household, regarded more as ritualistic offerings than as human beings. The direct encounter with Theseus, however, fundamentally altered her perspective. For the very first time, she found herself confronting an individual destined for sacrifice to satiate her family's monstrous creation. And unlike the others, Theseus exhibited a unique defiance. He refused to passively accept his grim destiny, displaying a clear intent to resist. This turn of events presented Ariadne with a profound ethical dilemma. She possessed the means to preserve Theseus's existence by guiding him through the intricate maze. Yet, undertaking such an action would signify an act of disloyalty against her sovereign father and potentially lead to the ruination of her own kin, should her perfidy be uncovered by Minos. In the culmination, Ariadne made a pivotal decision, one that would irrevocably shape her future. She arrived at the conviction that certain societal structures are inherently too abhorrent to uphold, even if challenging them necessitates forsaking all familiar comforts and securities. On the eve of Theseus's scheduled entry into the labyrinth, Ariadne undertook a clandestine visit to his confinement chamber. She presented him with a crucial artifact that Daedalus himself had bestowed upon her, a miraculous skein of thread, possessing the inherent property of unerringly guiding one back to its origin, regardless of the labyrinth's intricate unwinding. Secure one end at the entrance, she imparted in hushed instructions. Allow it to unspool as you venture deeper into the maze. Upon vanquishing the beast, retrace the silken path to liberty. But she also furnished him with an equally invaluable boon, an intimate understanding of the Minotaur's behavioral patterns, privileged information accessible only to one raised within the royal precincts. The creature's peak strength manifested during daylight hours, contrasting sharply with its nocturnal lethargy. It suffered from significant visual impairment, yet compensated with an acute olfactory sense. While cunning enough to devise snares, its susceptibility to pride could incite it to abandon tactical planning for raw, unbridled power when directly challenged. The subsequent dawn witnessed Theseus's entry into the labyrinth, laden not only with Ariadne's silken guide and her strategic insights, but also bearing the collective aspirations of all those who had suffered loss under King Minos's draconian regime. The labyrinth proved even more overwhelmingly disorienting than he had anticipated. The walls were etched with illusory portals and enigmatic, misleading glyphs. The passages twisted, diverged, and looped back upon themselves in configurations that defied rational comprehension. Even with the thread to ensure his return, Theseus found himself becoming increasingly bewildered regarding his orientation within the maze. Nevertheless, he maintained his unwavering advance, penetrating ever deeper into the intricate network, drawn forward by the subtle exhalations of the Minotaur and the more potent, chilling aroma of ancient ossuaries and pervasive dread. Upon his arrival at the labyrinth's core, Theseus discovered himself within a circular antechamber illuminated by a solitary beam of sunlight descending from a great height. And there, slumbering amidst a macabre cairn of human remains, lay the Minotaur. It presented as less imposing than Theseus had anticipated, yet possessed a startlingly human aspect. The creature's physique was that of a powerful, battle-scarred man, retaining a certain fluidity of motion, juxtaposed with the truly grotesque element. A colossal bull's head adorned with horns keen enough to penetrate bronze plating. For a momentary pause, Theseus hesitated. This entity was not merely a beast, it was also a tragic casualty. A being that had never willed its own existence, perpetually confined to perpetual gloom and sustained by a gruesome regimen of unwilling sacrifices. But then Theseus recalled the multitude of youths who had perished within that very chamber, and he understood that compassion for the Minotaur would invariably condemn future blameless individuals to similar fates. The ensuing combat proved unexpectedly brief, but intensely arduous. The Minotaur fought with the ferocity born of the desperation of a creature long imprisoned. But Theseus fought with the unwavering resolve of someone who was fueled by the collective aspirations of all who had ever been immolated to perpetuate a corrupt order. When the struggle concluded, Theseus, guided by Ariadne's silken line, retraced his path through the convoluted corridors back towards the ingress of the labyrinth. Behind him, he led the remaining 13 Athenian youths who had lingered near the entrance, clinging to a fragile hope of deliverance. Yet, Theseus's narrative extends beyond his mere flight from Crete, for the vanquishing of the beast merely marked the genesis of transforming the very apparatus that had engendered it in the first place, and that perhaps stands as the paramount insight of this venerable legend. True valour often resides not in confronting the immediate monstrosity, but in undertaking the arduous, protracted endeavour of constructing a societal framework where such abominations can no longer take root. Imagine for a moment an unparalleled cephalalgia, perhaps the most extraordinary in cosmic annals. One awakens one morning, and the skull feels as though it might rupture. But for Zeus, the sovereign of the pantheon, such afflictions are never commonplace. This particular morning on Mount Olympus commenced in typical fashion. Helios, the solar deity, was just beginning his celestial journey, bathing the grand palace's marble pillars in a gentle auric luminescence. Zeus had been engaged in restless perambulations through his abode, one hand firmly applied to his brow, endeavouring to decipher the peculiar intensifying discomfort that had persisted for several days. You see, months earlier, Zeus had received a disquieting augury. The Fates, those primordial sororal figures who meticulously spun the tapestry of destiny, had uttered a pronouncement that compelled even the formidable thunder god to momentarily halt. They declared that Metis, his initial consort and the divine embodiment of sagacity, was destined to bear an offspring who would, in due course, depose him, mirroring Zeus's own usurpation of his progenitor Kronos. Zeus, acting in what he then perceived as a rational manner, albeit one that strikes modern sensibilities as utterly bizarre, had entirely consumed Metis, under the conviction that this act would avert the fulfilment of the ominous prediction. But sagacity, it became apparent, proved resistant to simple confinement. Even within Zeus's very being, Metis persevered in nurturing their progeny, who steadily matured, acquiring knowledge and expanding in the most extraordinary, conceivable, internal sanctuary. For months, Zeus sensed the child's stirrings, its cognitive processes, and even its constructive activities within his cranium. One might ponder what it would feel like to experience such internal fabrication. The resonant cadence of miniature hammers striking metal reverberated ceaselessly through Zeus's consciousness day and night. The nascent deity, it seemed, was already engaged in labour, already manifesting creativity, already undertaking preparations for its eventual emergence into the external realm. This morning, though, the internal pressure had escalated to an intolerable degree. Zeus issued a summons to Hephaestus, the divine artisan of flame and metallurgy, and his own progeny. Hephaestus arrived at the palatial residence with his bronze axe still radiating residual warmth from the smithy, his powerful limbs bearing traces of soot, pondering the exigency of his paternal summons. "My head," Zeus declared concisely, and Hephaestus instantly grasped the situation. Deities often possess an inherent understanding of circumstances, obviating the need for extensive exposition. Hephaestus had anticipated this very day, having even envisioned it during tranquil hours in his workshop, amidst the sole audible sounds of hammer-meeting anvil in rhythmic succession. They stood together on the palace's loftiest veranda, where the dawn atmosphere was crisp and pure. Below them, the mortal realm went about its routine daily occupations, cultivators inspecting their olive orchards, piscators repairing their seines, youngsters at play in sun-dusted enclosures. None of them possessed the unwitting ignorance of the impending divine parturition. Hephaestus elevated his axe, and with a single meticulously executed blow, he cleaved Zeus's cranium. What happened next was of such unparalleled nature that even the other deities, accustomed to myriad marvels, ceased their discourse and gazed in awe. From Zeus's head emerged a fully developed female figure, already clad in resplendent panoply seemingly forged from the very luminescence of distant stars. Her helmet captured the morning's solar radiance and reflected it in dazzling beams. Her spear was impeccably poised, her shield burnished to a mirror-like sheen. This was Athena, the revered goddess of sagacity and martial prowess, brought forth not as a vulnerable neonate, but as an entirely formed entity, prepared to assume her rightful station within the Olympian pantheon. But here lies the element that rendered this event even more extraordinary. Athena's inaugural action was not verbal articulation or physical locomotion, but profound cogitation. One could discern this in her discerning grey eyes, the way they absorbed every environmental detail with meticulous deliberation. She scrutinized the palatial architecture, discerning the spacing and rationale of its columns. She observed the interplay of light upon the marble surfaces and comprehended its underlying mathematical principles. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm and precisely modulated. "Father," she articulated to Zeus, "I now grasp the reason for my secure gestation within your intellect. The world awaits considerable endeavour." Zeus, stroking his now repaired brow, evinced a smile tinged with both alleviation and paternal gratification. What is truly fascinating about Athena's genesis is how it reflects the paramount values of the Hellenic civilization. She originated not from impulsion or fortuity, but from pure intellect. She manifested in her complete emergence because sagacity, it asserts, does not accrue incrementally. It arrives in its entirety, poised to confront any forthcoming trials. In the days that followed, Athena explored Mount Olympus with the inquisitiveness of a novice beholding existence, yet imbued with the profound comprehension of one who had contemplated it for an extended period. She undertook a visit to Hephaestus's forge, where she assimilated knowledge of fabrication and construction. She engaged in discourse with Apollo regarding melodic and poetic arts, instantly apprehending the symbiotic relationship of rhythm and meter in forging aesthetic excellence. From her elevated celestial perch, the vigilant gaze of the goddess Athena was most profoundly captivated by the intricate tapestry of the mortal realm unfolding below. From this lofty perspective, she discerned nascent urban centres grappling with the complexities of self-governance, their citizens wrestling with intricate dilemmas concerning jurisprudence and public administration, and skilled craftspeople meticulously striving for mastery in their respective trades. It became evident that her profound sagacity and strategic acumen were most critically required in this earthly domain. The premier city Athena elected to assist was one destined to bear her illustrious name, Athens. The inhabitants there were engaged in earnest deliberations regarding the optimal structural framework for their burgeoning community, striving to formulate equitable judgments and policies that would genuinely serve the collective well-being. Athena observed their impassioned exchanges with keen fascination, noting how they grappled with profound inquiries that resisted simplistic resolutions. She manifested herself to them not in the guise of a triumphant divine conqueror, but rather as an insightful instructor, appearing in the agora, the bustling heart of their polis. There she imparted practical instruction in the intricate disciplines of ceramics, textile production, and the venerable practice of cultivating olives. These proficiencies were far from arbitrary selections. Instead, each embodied a distinct facet of profound sagacity. The art of pottery instilled the virtue of forbearance and the fundamental insight that objects of significant utility could be artfully moulded from the most unassuming of terrestrial elements. Textile weaving elucidated the principle that disparate individual filaments, when meticulously arranged and interwoven, coalesce to form a fabric of superior strength and aesthetic grandeur compared to any solitary thread. Furthermore, the cultivation of the olive tree served as a potent illustration of foresight and enduring strategic planning, given that these venerable trees demand considerable years to reach full maturity, yet subsequently yield vital sustenance and precious oil, benefiting countless generations. The people of Athens assimilated these profound teachings with remarkable diligence and aptitude. They commenced perceiving their burgeoning metropolis not merely as a coincidental habitation, but rather as an evolving entity that they possessed the agency to sculpt and refine through diligent intellectual application and persistent labour. They pioneered innovative frameworks for civic administration, devised novel methodologies for collective deliberation and consensus building, and instituted progressive pedagogical approaches that prioritized rigorous critical thinking and lucid problem analysis. A particularly compelling aspect of this narrative is the manner in which Athena's profound influence began to disseminate beyond the confines of Athens. Neighbouring polities, having become cognizant of the sagacious practices flourishing within Athens, dispatched emissaries and delegates to absorb these valuable insights. These returning envoys carried back to their homelands a wealth of novel concepts pertaining to architectural innovation, the strategic organization of communities, and the enlightened resolution of conflicts through reasoned discourse rather than brute force. Nevertheless, Athena consistently refrained from appropriating any personal accolades for these monumental societal advancements. When approached with expressions of gratitude, she would gracefully emphasize that the fundamental wellspring of sagacity had, in fact, resided intrinsically within the people themselves from the very outset. Her role, she explained, was merely to facilitate the structured arrangement of their burgeoning concepts, mirroring the very genesis of her own being, which manifested as the coherent organization of Zeus's disparate intellectual fragments into a distinct and intentional entity. She would often muse upon the profound truth that the most significant insights frequently emanate not from external sources, but from the deliberate structuring of inherent human capacities. She recognized the myriad ideas constantly incubating within the collective human consciousness, patiently awaiting their opportune moment to fully materialize. This perspective suggested that a wealth of latent wisdom lay within individuals, quietly developing in the recesses of their minds, poised to offer profound clarity to their perception of the world. Expanding upon this contemplative notion concerning the essence of wisdom and the genuine values people hold dear, one might then turn to the compelling narrative of a certain monarch who held a firm conviction regarding the precise nature of his desires, only to ascertain, through arduous experience, that the fulfillment of one's deepest aspirations does not invariably confer the benediction one initially envisions. King Midas presided over the ancient realm of Phrygia, a territory elegantly situated within the geographical expanse presently recognized as modern-day Turkey. Its undulating topography was gracefully punctuated by verdant olive groves and flourishing vineyards. From his regal abode, the king commanded a panoramic vista of valleys where pastoralists diligently guided their woolly charges along time-honored routes, and where enterprising merchants traversed sun-baked thoroughfares, transporting valuable commodities from far-flung territories. While the kingdom enjoyed a period of relative tranquility and sufficient prosperity, Midas frequently found his gaze drawn to his royal coffers, harbouring an insatiable yearning for their contents to be vastly augmented. King Midas had cultivated what could be aptly described as an obsessive preoccupation with enumeration and accumulation. With the advent of each new day, subsequent to partaking of his morning repast, consisting of delectable honey cakes and refreshing goat's milk, he would punctually descend the cool, chiselled stone steps leading to his opulent treasure chamber. There, he would indulge in the tactile sensation of sifting his fingers through shimmering mounds of silver coinage, elevate resplendent golden chalices to playfully capture the ambient lamplight, and meticulously align glittering precious gemstones into precisely ordered arrangements. The subtle, resonant clicking of metal against metal and the delicate clinking of stone upon stone coalesced into a peculiar auditory delight for him, an opulent symphony of material prosperity. Yet, as Midas would incrementally ascertain, immense riches possessed a singularly perplexing characteristic. It seemed that the greater one's existing possessions, the more conspicuously one perceived the absence of further acquisitions. His royal treasury, which previously had appeared to him as a paragon of magnificent plenitude, gradually started to evoke a sense of disheartening inadequacy when juxtaposed against the fabled fortunes amassed by other powerful monarchies. Tales reached his ears of Egyptian pharaohs whose sepulchres overflowed with untold quantities of gold, of Persian potentates whose regal crowns bore gemstones of extraordinary magnitude, comparable to the dimensions of avian ova, and of influential merchants who commanded vast flotillas of vessels, each brimming with valuable cargo. During the languid hours of a notably warm afternoon, as King Midas ambled contemplatively through the fragrant expanse of his meticulously cultivated rose garden, endeavouring to dislodge the pervasive golden-hued musings from his mind, his attention was suddenly arrested by an uncharacteristic disturbance emanating from the vicinity of the garden's ornamental fountain. His vigilant palace guards had discovered an individual slumbering amidst the verdant rose bushes, an elderly man whose dishevelled hair was entwined with verdant leaves, and whose unadorned tunic bore the telltale stains of fermented grape. This unexpected guest was identified as Silenus, a jovial satyr and an esteemed companion within the retinue of the revered deity Dionysus. Silenus, it transpired, had partaken a touch too liberally in the previous evening's revelries, and having inadvertently strayed from Dionysus's spirited procession, had ultimately succumbed to slumber within the tranquil confines of Midas's private garden. Whereas the majority of monarchs might have evinced considerable displeasure at the discovery of an unauthorized stranger encroaching upon their secluded private domains, King Midas, by contrast, harboured an immediate and profound curiosity regarding the identity and nature of this unconventional interloper. For a period spanning 10 consecutive days, Midas extended to Silenus the lavish hospitality befitting a distinguished dignitary. They partook of sumptuous repasts together upon the expansive palace terrace, their conversations accompanied by the breathtaking spectacle of the setting sun, which meticulously adorned the distant mountain ranges with a magnificent palette of molten gold and deep regal purple. Silenus regaled his host with captivating anecdotes of his peregrinations alongside Dionysus, recounting vibrant narratives of exuberant festivals held in far-off metropolises, of vineyards yielding vintages so exquisitely sweet they could induce tears of pure rapture in mortal imbibers, and of joyous celebrations that persisted without abatement from one lunar cycle to the next. The most profound impression these narratives left upon Midas was their consistent thematic focus. They invariably celebrated the richness of experiential moment rather than the mere acquisition of material possessions. Silenus vividly described idyllic evenings where melodious music and unrestrained laughter appeared to elevate individuals beyond their mundane worries, of unpretentious repasts transformed into enchanting occasions through the camaraderie of shared friendship, and of spirited dances that persisted until the break of day, fueled by a collective reluctance for the revelry to conclude. Upon the arrival of Dionysus, who came to reclaim his jovial companion, the god was so profoundly gratified by Midas's exemplary hospitality that he magnanimously presented the monarch with an unconditional offer of any boon he might wish for. "Absolutely anything at all," Dionysus declared, his divine eyes sparkling with that particular brand of playful cunning that deities occasionally exhibit when they shrewdly anticipate mortals are on the verge of committing remarkably instructive errors. With an uncharacteristic lack of deliberation, Midas articulated his profound desire. He implored, "Bestow upon me the extraordinary ability that everything I make contact with shall transmute into pure gold." Dionysus, with a subtle arch of his brow, inquired whether Midas possessed absolute certainty regarding the true nature of his fervent wish. The monarch affirmed with fervent enthusiasm, his mind already awash with vivid mental images of the satisfying heft of countless golden coins, the resplendent gleam of innumerable golden effigies, and the boundless shimmering opulence that he believed would imminently become his. Dionysus conceded the extraordinary request with a seemingly nonchalant gesture, almost as if dismissing a trivial annoyance. "It is accomplished," he stated with understated finality. Thereafter, both he and Silenus took their leave, abandoning Midas to the solitary company of his newly acquired and formidable ability. The initial trial of this miraculous endowment was, by all accounts, a modest undertaking. Midas extended his hand and made contact with a delicate rose blooming within his verdant garden. With instantaneous effect, the pliant, velvety petals transmuted into a rigid, resplendent gold. The metamorphosis, in its peculiar aesthetic, possessed a certain striking allure. Each intricate particular of the floral form was flawlessly retained. Every graceful undulation of each individual petal was meticulously encapsulated in the lustrous, noble metal. However, the rose no longer exuded its characteristic fragrant perfume. It ceased to sway with subtle grace in the ambient zephyr. It had been rendered into an impeccable, yet utterly inert, simulacrum of its former vibrant self. Nevertheless, Midas remained profoundly exhilarated by this initial demonstration of his power. He proceeded to traverse his regal residence, indiscriminately touching every object within his grasp. Ordinary chairs were instantaneously transformed into lustrous golden thrones. Draped curtains assumed the shimmering texture of woven gold. Even the very flagstones beneath his royal footsteps transmuted into precious metal as he trod upon them. By the close of day, his entire palace presented the aspect of an ethereal vision, a fantastical construct. Everything within its walls gleamed with an unparalleled radiance. Everything was imbued with inestimable value. Everything surpassed the collective worth of entire sovereign realms. The unforeseen difficulties, however, commenced with the advent of the evening meal. Midas, fatigued by his day-long endeavours of metallic transmutation, settled himself at the dining table with the intention of partaking in supper. As he extended his hand to grasp a succulent grape, the fruit instantly solidified into a rigid golden orb within his grasp. He attempted to quaff a draught of wine, but the liquid instantly congealed into a metallic, unyielding substance the very instant it made contact with his lips. Bread, sweet honey, even the most fundamental of all sustenance, water. Every item he sought to ingest was rendered into unpalatable gold the moment his skin brushed against it. Throughout that initial night, Midas reposed in his resplendent golden bed, encircled by shimmering golden pillows, his gaze fixed upon the gilded ceiling, as his stomach painfully constricted with the pangs of profound hunger. The cruel paradox of his predicament was not lost upon his increasingly dismayed consciousness. He ostensibly possessed the greatest material fortune known to humanity, yet he found himself utterly incapable of procuring even the simplest, most basic nourishment. However, the most profound and soul-crushing anguish descended upon him the following morning, when his cherished daughter Zoe habitually rushed forth to offer her customary morning salutations. Zoe represented the very essence of his pride and deepest affection. A vibrant 10-year-old child whose innocent exuberance and incessant inquiries about every aspect of her world invariably suffused the royal residence with infectious laughter and intellectual curiosity. In an instinctive, unthinking gesture, Midas extended his arms to enfold her in the customary paternal embrace. The ensuing metamorphosis was both instantaneous and tragically irreversible. In one fleeting instant, Zoe was a living, breathing child, her countenance radiant with the effulgence of morning cheer. In the subsequent heartbeat, she had become an exquisitely wrought, golden effigy, permanently arrested in the dynamic posture of mid-stride. Her expression, frozen in an attitude of joyous anticipation, was flawlessly preserved, yet she was irrevocably deprived of the ability to utter a single word, to emit a single peal of laughter, or to pose the myriad unending questions that had previously enchanted Midas far more profoundly than any material treasure. Overwhelmed by an unbearable wave of remorse and anguish, Midas collapsed to his knees beside the inert, golden representation of his beloved child. Copious tears coursed unchecked down his sorrow-stricken countenance, as he at last grasped the terrible, irreversible bargain he had unknowingly struck. The entirety of the world's amassed gold now registered as utterly worthless when weighed against the simple, vital warmth of Zoe, small hand clasped within his own, against the tender sound of her voice affectionately calling, "Good morning, Papa," or against her animated prattling about the various birds she had observed from her chamber window. For 3 agonizing days, the distraught monarch remained vigilantly seated beside his daughter's immutable golden effigy, utterly incapable of partaking of food or achieving restful slumber. His torment exacerbated by the hollow resonance of his own footsteps, which reverberated mournfully through the now undeniably beautiful, yet profoundly lifeless halls of his palace. Every object that met his gaze served as a poignant, agonizing memento of all that he had so tragically forfeited. The once vibrant roses, now transformed to gold, would never again unfurl their soft petals. The gilded fruit trees would perpetually fail to offer either cooling shade or life-sustaining nourishment. His resplendent golden palace, in its overwhelming opulence, had been irrevocably transmuted into a magnificent, yet desolate sepulchre. Finally, King Midas, having reached the precipice of despair, sought out Dionysus at the designated river, a place the deity had previously indicated for times of dire need. There, the god of wine and revelry awaited, seemingly prescient of the monarch's inevitable arrival, betraying no astonishment at Midas's gaunt and utterly forlorn appearance. With a profound sense of contrition, Midas confessed his error. "My judgment was gravely flawed," he admitted plainly. "I implore you, revoke this so-called blessing. I would gladly embrace the most abject penury rather than endure the opulent isolation of a king unable to hold his own child." Dionysus responded with a subtle yet profound gesture of understanding and a seemingly compassionate inclination of his head. "Immerse yourself in the currents of the river Pactolus," he directed, his voice imbued with ancient wisdom. "Its flowing depths will expunge the Midas touch, and you shall possess the means to revert all that you have transmuted by merely sprinkling its revitalizing liquid upon them." Without a moment's hesitation, Midas sprinted towards the Pactolus and, without shedding his regal attire, cast himself into its flowing embrace. The profound sense of liberation that washed over him as the cursed ability receded from his being was an experience utterly ineffable. He swiftly gathered the precious river water, into various vessels and hastened his return to the royal residence, meticulously sprinkling the life-giving liquid upon every object his touch had previously transmuted. He reserved his beloved daughter Zoe for the very final act, his heart trembling with a fragile mixture of apprehension and burgeoning anticipation. Yet, the instant the sacred water graced Zoe's inert golden effigy, a vibrant resurgence of hue and vitality coursed through her, akin to the first rays of dawn illuminating a dormant valley. Her inaugural gasp for air, the hesitant flutter of her eyelids, her initial bewildered inquiry regarding the peculiar stiffness she felt. These simple human expressions resonated with a beauty and significance to Midas that surpassed all the grandest symphonies and melodies the world could ever offer. Later that same evening, as father and daughter partook of an unpretentious repast of fresh bread and succulent olives, Zoe, with the innocent perceptiveness of youth, inquired of her father why his demeanour appeared so altered, so profoundly engaged with her every utterance. Midas, seizing the teachable moment, recounted the profound narrative of wishes and their often unforeseen repercussions, elucidating the crucial distinction between superficial desires and the genuine sources of human contentment. From that pivotal day onward, King Midas's royal coffers, while sufficient, maintained a humble dimension. However, his profound gratitude for every facet of his existence expanded boundlessly. He began to truly perceive the delicate dance of morning light upon Zoe's countenance during their shared breakfast. He relished the elemental flavours of uncomplicated fare enjoyed in the company of those he cherished. He dedicated countless hours to dialogues that, while generating no material riches, infused his daily life with an inestimable sense of purpose and profound significance. To this very day, the legendary river Pactolus is said to relinquish shimmering flecks of gold within its currents, a legacy attributed not to the transient curse of Midas's golden touch, but rather to the enduring wisdom gleaned from the profound lesson imparted within its banks concerning life's authentic values. Indeed, it is not uncommon during the hushed hours of the late night, when the clamour of the world subsides, for an individual to find themselves contemplating their own aspirations and the stark dichotomy between superficial allure and that which genuinely enriches one's existence. What unassuming delights, one might ponder, have perhaps been disregarded in the relentless pursuit of perceived greater worth? What fleeting instances of human connection patiently await recognition and profound appreciation, proving themselves infinitely more valuable than any tangible gold? Transitioning from contemplations of treasures both forfeited and rediscovered, the narrative now guides one's attention towards an enigma that has captivated and perplexed scholars for millennia: the legendary account of Atlantis. This was a metropolis described as possessing such unparalleled advancement, breathtaking aesthetic appeal, and unyielding hubris that it ultimately succumbed, disappearing beneath the ocean's expanse within the span of a single tumultuous day and night. One is invited to envision an island dominion situated beyond the fabled Pillars of Hercules, a geographical marker now recognized as the Strait of Gibraltar. This was no mere landmass, but rather an extraordinary realm where the zenith of human inventiveness had forged marvels bordering on the supernatural. The heart of this civilization, the city of Atlantis itself, was meticulously constructed in a series of flawless concentric circles, each distinct ring demarcated by canals that gleamed with the brilliance of precious gems under the radiant Mediterranean sun. The populace of Atlantis was reputedly descended directly from Poseidon, the formidable god of the sea himself. Their revered progenitor Atlas had been bestowed with sovereign rule over this idyllic island sanctuary, and his progeny had in turn inherited both his profound sagacity and an intrinsic bond with the vast ocean that enveloped their domain. For countless generations, these Atlanteans coexisted in an exemplary state of equilibrium with the marine environment, their magnificent vessels voyaging to remote shores not as instruments of subjugation, but as emissaries of commerce and enlightenment. The true distinction of Atlantis lay not solely in its prodigious affluence, though the city undoubtedly commanded treasures of unimaginable scope. Rather, its most astonishing attribute was the sophisticated framework upon which the Atlanteans had meticulously structured their society. They had conceived intricate governmental paradigms that deftly reconciled the tenets of individual liberty with the imperative of communal accountability. Their educational institutions imparted not merely vocational proficiencies, but also profound philosophical principles and rigorous ethical frameworks. Furthermore, their vibrant marketplaces functioned according to equitable doctrines, guaranteeing that every citizen possessed ready access to their fundamental necessities. The architectural splendor of Atlantis served as a direct manifestation of this societal equilibrium. The innermost concentric ring encompassed the majestic royal palace and the sacred temples, structures meticulously fashioned from indigenous white, black, and red stone extracted directly from the island's abundant quarries. These edifices transcended mere utility. They were conceived with an overarching purpose to evoke inspiration in all who beheld them, their meticulously balanced proportions instilling a profound sensation of tranquility and awe. The intermediate rings were dedicated to lush botanical gardens and expansive gymnasiums, providing venues where the citizenry could cultivate both their physical prowess and their intellectual faculties. Finally, the outermost ring accommodated the bustling workshops and the extensive harbours, serving as the vibrant epicentres where the pragmatic endeavours of the city unfolded. Nevertheless, it was perhaps the breathtaking feats of engineering that truly distinguished Atlantis. The Atlanteans had devised an intricate network of bridges and subterranean passages that seamlessly interconnected all the concentric rings, thereby facilitating the unimpeded and highly efficient transit of both inhabitants and merchandise throughout the expansive metropolis. They had also pioneered sophisticated methodologies for climate regulation, ensuring that their architectural masterpieces remained perpetually comfortable, regardless of the season. Their state-of-the-art harbours were capable of accommodating maritime vessels hailing from every corner of the then-known world, equipped with ingenious mechanical apparatuses that rendered the processes of cargo loading and unloading both remarkably expeditious and inherently secure. For a span of many centuries, this meticulously crafted societal and infrastructural framework functioned with unparalleled grace and efficacy. Atlantean navigators and scholars venturing across distant seas returned laden with invaluable intellectual treasures, sophisticated mathematical principles gleaned from Babylon, intricate astronomical observations acquired from the ancient land of Egypt, and nascent philosophical concepts originating from the burgeoning Greek city-states. Crucially, rather than merely assimilating these external notions wholesale, the Atlanteans demonstrated a profound ingenuity by seamlessly weaving them into the fabric of their own established traditions, thereby forging intellectual syntheses that proved exponentially more potent and comprehensive than the mere aggregation of their constituent elements. The insidious inflection point in Atlantis's grand trajectory manifested with a creeping subtlety, so imperceptible in fact, that the vast majority of its inhabitants failed to discern its onset. Prosperity, it would appear, often harbours its own distinct perils. As the magnificent city ascended to ever greater heights of affluence and renown, its citizenry gradually succumbed to a pervasive complacency, beginning to regard their extraordinary accomplishments as inherent entitlements rather than fruits of diligent effort. The complex mechanisms that had once demanded scrupulous upkeep and unremitting vigilance were now erroneously presumed to possess an intrinsic, self-perpetuating nature. Moreover, the foundational ethical principles and profound values that had meticulously steered preceding generations began to be perceived as antiquated relics, superfluous encumbrances upon what was increasingly envisioned as an boundless reservoir of potential. Concomitantly, a new cadre of leadership ascended to prominence within the Atlantean hierarchy. These were individuals who had been nurtured amidst the resplendent marvels of Atlantis, yet had never known the arduous toil required to bring them into being. Surveying their impeccably ordered metropolis, they arrived at a collective conviction that the era for expansion had dawned. It was, they declared, time to disseminate Atlantis's purportedly superior methodologies across the globe, irrespective of whether other nations embraced such an imposition. These burgeoning leaders commenced articulating a grand narrative of Atlantis's preordained destiny, asserting its inherent obligation to superintend what they deemed to be less developed civilizations. In parallel with this ideological shift, they began to cultivate military technologies that rivaled the sophistication of their earlier peaceful innovations. Their once venerated ships, which had previously been greeted in foreign harbours as esteemed purveyors of commerce and erudition, now commenced their voyages as unmistakable omens of impending subjugation. The profound transformation permeating Atlantean society manifested tangibly even within the quotidian rhythms of the city. The once vibrant public forums, where citizens had historically convened for robust discourse and policy deliberation, devolved into mere venues for the unilateral pronouncement of governmental decrees. Educational institutions, once bastions of holistic learning, began to prioritize specialized technical instruction at the expense of profound ethical contemplation. Furthermore, the industrious workshops, which had previously crafted artifacts of exquisite artistry and practical benefit, increasingly redirected their efforts towards the manufacture of armaments and instruments of subjugation. Yet, the Olympian deities, and Zeus in particular, observed these escalating developments with intensifying apprehension. The extraordinary endowments bestowed upon the Atlanteans had been conceived as an ambitious trial in the boundless scope of human capability. The fundamental query had been, what pinnacles might humanity attain if afforded optimal circumstances and celestial tutelage? This grand experiment was now demonstrably faltering, not as a consequence of external aggressions or unforeseen cataclysms, but rather as a direct outcome of the misguided decisions freely made by the Atlanteans themselves. In response to the escalating crisis, Zeus convened a solemn convocation of the Olympian pantheon to deliberate upon the appropriate course of action. Among the assembled deities, some advocated for direct intervention, proposing the dispatch of divine omens and cautionary signals that might yet steer Atlantis back towards its foundational principles. Others contended that the grand experiment should be permitted to run its full course, positing that even a catastrophic failure could impart invaluable lessons to future generations. However, the sovereign judgment of Zeus was unequivocal. He determined that Atlantis had tragically transformed into a menace, not merely to its neighboring civilizations, but to the very delicate equilibrium of the cosmos itself. The denouement arrived with terrifying abruptness. Within the span of a single calamitous day and night, marked by colossal seismic upheavals and devastating inundations, Atlantis was inexorably swallowed by the oceanic depths. The meticulously engineered canals, once conduits of urban life, were transformed into ravenous arteries through which the tempestuous sea surged inward. The resplendent edifices, conceived with aspirations of eternal endurance, disintegrated into ruin under the onslaught of forces far exceeding their architects' most meticulous computations. The formidable fleet of ships, which had been poised to project Atlantean dominion across the known world, became nothing more than shattered flotsam strewn haphazardly across the abyssal ocean floor. Yet, what elevates the narrative of Atlantis beyond a mere chronicle of divine retribution is its profound resonance as a testament to collective memory and the imperative of learning. Though the obliteration of the city was absolute, its accumulated knowledge did not entirely vanish. A select few Atlanteans had been engaged in voyages abroad when the cataclysms struck, while others had previously migrated to remote colonial outposts years prior. These fortunate survivors bore with them not merely the advanced technical expertise of their civilization, but also the searing recollection of its monumental achievements and the tragic reasons for its downfall. These dispersed fragments of Atlantean sagacity subsequently permeated and profoundly shaped the developmental trajectories of disparate cultures. For instance, their sophisticated mathematical insights subtly infused Babylonian astronomical practices. Their pioneering architectural principles became discernible in the majestic monuments of Egypt, and their profound philosophical concepts contributed significantly to the efflorescence of Greek intellectual inquiry. Crucially, these custodians of a lost world meticulously transmitted only the constructive facets of their ancestral heritage, ensuring that the solemn admonitions concerning hubris and the misuse of dominion remained vibrantly alive. It is precisely for these profound reasons that Plato, many centuries subsequent to the alleged catastrophe, penned his discourse on Atlantis, not in the capacity of a meticulous historian chronicling empirical data, but rather as a profound philosopher meticulously dissecting abstract concepts. He masterfully employed the narrative as a powerful allegorical instrument to scrutinize fundamental inquiries that resonated as deeply with the citizens of ancient Athens as they continue to do with contemporary humanity. What are the inevitable ramifications when the technological prowess and capabilities of a society outstrip its concomitant wisdom? How does one steadfastly uphold the foundational virtues that initially propelled a civilization to eminence once the very condition of success becomes an unremarkable norm? What inherent obligations accompany the exercise of power, whether vested in an individual or a collective entity? The tangible landmass of Atlantis may have indeed been subsumed by the ocean's embrace, yet its profound, underlying significance persistently re-emerges in novel manifestations. Every civilization that has scaled impressive heights of achievement has, in due course, been confronted with the identical existential dilemma that once challenged the Atlanteans, whether to harness their monumental accomplishments as instruments for constructive development or as armaments for destructive dominion. One might, in moments of quiet contemplation, consider the ephemeral Atlantices that exist within individual lives. These metaphorical submerged cities represent the intricate systems and cherished relationships meticulously constructed over time, each demanding diligent guardianship and constant nurturing to ensure their enduring vitality. It compels one to ponder the fundamental principles and ethical frameworks that steer decisions, particularly when the allure of achievement might subtly suggest an exemption from established guidelines. Ultimately, the most profound wealth may not reside in the grand edifices created, but rather in the profound sagacity required to safeguard the most essential elements of those very constructions. Shifting focus from the transient nature of lost civilizations, the narrative now embraces transformations that perpetually reappear, the ceaseless rhythm dictating periods of gloom and luminosity, of demise and resurgence where every conclusion inherently contains the genesis of a new start. This foundational principle underpins the explanation for the Earth's distinct seasons and elucidates why the most pivotal expeditions occasionally lead individuals far beyond their familiar origins. Persephone, the beloved offspring of Demeter, the revered deity of bounteous harvests, had spent her formative years enveloped by the ceaseless plenty her mother meticulously cultivated. Their cherished dwelling was situated within a verdant valley where the essence of spring appeared to reign perpetually, blossoms perpetually unfurling, arboreal giants consistently yielding their fruits, and fertile fields ever prepared for the reaper's scythe. It was undeniably a realm of breathtaking beauty, yet perhaps it was also excessively insulated, an environment almost too flawless for a youthful soul brimming with inquisitiveness about the broader cosmos. Persephone customarily passed her daylight hours roaming through sun-drenched meadows alongside her cherished companions, the Oceanid nymphs, who had shared her journey from the earliest days of her youth. Together they would meticulously collect vibrant flowers, intricately fashion coronets from supple vines, share ancient tales, and engage in carefree pastimes whose sole objective was pure, unadulterated delight. It was, by all accounts, an existence of profound pastoral bliss. Nevertheless, a peculiar disquiet had recently begun to stir within Persephone, an intuitive apprehension that a wealth of novel experiences and profound insights awaited her beyond the confines of her mother's meticulously safeguarded valley. She had, with increasing frequency, posed queries to Demeter, questions that visibly discomfited the goddess of the harvest. She sought to understand the subterranean forces that nourished plant life, the rationale behind certain seeds necessitating burial in profound obscurity before their ascent towards illumination, and the nature of the cyclical phase her mother conspicuously avoided mentioning, the process of decline and cessation that appeared indispensable for any subsequent renewal. Demeter, with predictable regularity, would skillfully redirect the discourse whenever these challenging topics surfaced. Her unwavering dedication had been invested in meticulously crafting a domain where her beloved daughter would remain perpetually shielded from the harsh realities of bereavement or affliction. The mere notion that Persephone might harbour an inquisitive mind regarding these more sombre facets of being profoundly disturbed her maternal sensibilities. Consequently, she intensified her already considerable protective measures, meticulously orchestrating her daughter's schedule to be replete with agreeable diversions, hoping to divert her attention from such unsettling contemplations. However, Hades, the formidable sovereign of the subterranean dominion known as the underworld, had, from his remote and shadowy kingdom, been a silent observer of Persephone. He had discerned her inherently inquisitive disposition, her manifest discontent with superficial explanations, and her intrinsic bravery in posing challenging inquiries. In stark contrast to her mother's apprehension, he perceived these very attributes not as problematic, but rather as profoundly commendable. Here, he surmised, was a unique individual capable of grasping the profound truth that obscurity and radiance functioned as indispensable collaborators rather than adversaries within the magnificent choreography of existence itself. The pivotal day that irrevocably altered her destiny commenced with an unassuming normalcy. Persephone was engaged in the delightful pursuits of gathering blossoms with her attendant companions within a meadow that, on that particular morn, appeared exceptionally resplendent. The verdant turf yielded softly beneath their light footsteps. The ambient atmosphere was both balmy and fragrant, imbued with the intoxicating aroma of burgeoning narcissus. Persephone's attention was captivated by a singular bloom, a narcissus that radiated a more intense vivacity than its counterparts, its delicate petals refracting the sunlight in a manner almost mesmerizing. As she inclined herself to pluck this extraordinary specimen, the very ground beneath her feet dramatically sundered. Yet, rather than plummeting into an abyss, she experienced a sensation of being tenderly elevated by unseen forces, conveyed downwards through successive strata of earth and bedrock into subterranean grottos that shimmered with an abundance of precious stones and valuable ores. The descent, while undeniably unnerving, was simultaneously imbued with a sense of profound marvel. She was, in that moment, privy to vistas of the world that no mortal being had ever before witnessed. Upon her arrival in the underworld, she found herself not as a captive, but accorded the dignified status of a guest within a palatial edifice that surpassed the grandeur of her wildest imaginings. The expansive halls were intricately sculpted from lustrous black marble, exquisitely streaked with delicate veins of silver, and illuminated by ethereal flames that remarkably cast no shadows, emanating a gentle warmth devoid of any accompanying smoke. Here, too, flourished gardens, yet their flora diverged dramatically from any found in the terrestrial realm. Botanicals that blossomed in perpetual gloom, arboreal wonders that bore fruit of shimmering silver and gleaming gold, and blossoms that emitted soft, melodious strains instead of perfumed scents. Hades extended to her a greeting steeped in formal deference, elucidating that her presence in his realm was motivated not by egocentric desires, but by his profound conviction that she alone possessed the singular capacity to genuinely comprehend the intricacies of both cosmic spheres, the vibrant dominion of burgeoning life and overflowing plenty above, and the tranquil realm of repose and metamorphosis below. He graciously proposed to unveil to her the elaborate mechanisms of his domain, the intricate frameworks that rendered renewal feasible in the world above. The revelations Persephone encountered profoundly contradicted every tenet she had absorbed concerning mortality and cessation. The underworld, she discovered, functioned not as a punitive penitentiary, but rather as an expansive, intricate system of regeneration, where departed souls found respite and underwent revitalization between successive incarnations. She observed the meticulous methodology through which the vital essence of concluded existences was transmuted into the latent potential for novel proliferation. She assimilated knowledge regarding the delicate equilibrium indispensable for guaranteeing the enduring viability of life on the terrestrial surface. Concurrently, in the terrestrial sphere, Demeter had uncovered the alarming absence of her daughter and was consumed by a tempest of profound sorrow and incandescent fury. In her profound distress, she relinquished her sacred responsibilities as the venerated goddess of the harvest, embarking on a relentless, desperate odyssey across the face of the earth in pursuit of Persephone. Deprived of Demeter's nurturing ministrations, agricultural yields began to falter catastrophically. Arboreal specimens ceased to bear their accustomed fruits. Even the resilient grasses commenced a process of desiccation and decay. The perpetual springtime that had characterized Demeter's domain yielded to an unprecedented phenomenon for the world, an era of sterile frigidity, a period defined by pervasive dearth and anxious anticipation. Humanity, the mortal inhabitants of the upper world, began to endure immense hardship as provisions grew increasingly scarce, and the very terrestrial sphere appeared to retract its life-sustaining embrace. They directed fervent supplications towards the Olympian deities for succor, yet Demeter remained impervious to their desperate entreaties. She adamantly refused to reinstate agricultural bounty until her beloved daughter was safely restored to her maternal care. Zeus, observing the escalating global catastrophe, ultimately deemed it necessary to intervene. He dispatched Hermes, the swift-footed herald of the gods, to engage in parley with Hades regarding Persephone's restitution. However, upon Hermes' arrival in the chthonic realm, he encountered an unexpectedly intricate predicament. Persephone had, in truth, partaken of the sustenance indigenous to the underworld, not as a result of deception or coercion, but through a deliberate act of volition, choosing to sample a handful of seeds from a pomegranate, thereby accepting the inherent ramifications of that action. More significantly, Persephone had come to the profound realization that a permanent reversion to her former existence was no longer her desire. The profound insights she had acquired during her sojourn in the underworld had fundamentally transformed her perspective. She now grasped the underlying reason for the disquiet she had experienced within her mother's meticulously shielded valley. She had, it became clear, been instinctively perceiving the inherent deficiency of experiencing only a singular facet of existence's comprehensive cycle. The resolution that materialized from the intricate diplomatic exchanges ultimately brought satisfaction to all parties involved, albeit necessitating a degree of relinquishment from each. Persephone was designated to allocate a portion of every year within the underworld alongside Hades, where she would immerse herself in the profound enigmas of mortality and metamorphosis. For the remaining duration of the year, she would ascend to the terrestrial sphere, carrying with her the invaluable sagacity she had acquired from her subterranean experiences. When Persephone made her initial return for a reunion with Demeter, both maternal figure and daughter bore the indelible marks of their period of estrangement. Demeter had come to comprehend that her fiercely protective affection, when extended to its most extreme manifestation, could paradoxically evolve into a form of confinement. Persephone, meanwhile, had assimilated a depth of understanding that rendered her a more fully realized individual, a being who now encompassed an appreciation for both elation and lament, for burgeoning development and tranquil repose, for inception and cessation. Their emotional reconciliation heralded the restoration of bounteous fertility to the terrestrial realm. Yet this revitalized abundance differed fundamentally from its predecessor, exhibiting a greater complexity, a heightened sustainability, and a more pragmatic realism. The world now became acquainted with the distinct progression of seasons. Epochs of profusion seamlessly alternated with phases of dearth. Intervals of vigorous proliferation were succeeded by interludes of necessary dormancy. This novel arrangement was perceived not as a punitive measure or an enduring deprivation, but rather as a more sophisticated apprehension of the intrinsic mechanics of natural cycles. During the months when Persephone resided upon the surface, the earth burst forth with the vibrant life of spring and flourished luxuriantly throughout the summer. Conversely, during her sojourn below, autumn delivered its rich harvests, and winter ushered in a period of profound repose. Agriculturalists, in turn, assimilated the wisdom of collaborating with these inherent rhythms instead of striving against them, meticulously preserving the surplus yielded during the growing season to sustain themselves through the quiescent, fallow intervals. However, the more profound and enduring legacy of Persephone's transformative odyssey lay in the invaluable sagacity she repatriated concerning the indispensable role of arduous experiences. She had assimilated the profound truth that certain modalities of development are exclusively attainable within conditions of obscurity, that particular manifestations of fortitude are cultivated solely through confronting formidable adversities, and that specific categories of insight emerge only from the direct encounter with bereavement and subsequent recuperation. Consequently, she evolved into an emblematic mentor for mortal beings confronting their own inevitable passages into challenging territories, those junctures when existence compelled them to relinquish customary assurances and embark upon expeditions into uncharted domains. Her compelling narrative served as a potent reminder that such ventures, irrespective of their initial daunting aspect, frequently culminated in revelations that rendered the voyagers more integrated, more proficient, and more authentically vital. The Hellenic forebears who transmitted this venerable narrative possessed a profound comprehension of a pivotal aspect of human evolution. They recognized that individuals are precluded from perpetually dwelling within the safeguarded wellsprings of childhood. Furthermore, they understood that the attainment of genuine maturity necessitates a reconciliation with the inherent rhythms of forfeiture and restoration. This wisdom, they believed, frequently emanates from the deliberate engagement with encounters that, at first impression, appear menacing or undesirable. As the cyclical periods of one's own existence persist in their primordial revolution, one might reflect upon the profound insights Persephone garnered during her subterranean sojourn. It suggests that occasionally the most profound development germinates within the most shadowed recesses. It posits that conclusions invariably create fertile ground for novel inaugurations. It contends that the fortitude to confront arduous metamorphoses often yields revelations of greater intrinsic worth than the familiar solace one relinquishes. Consequently, one is prompted to consider what dormant seeds of potential might lie poised to germinate within the quiescent, fallow intervals of one's personal experience. Moving beyond Persephone's purposeful descent into the chthonic realms, our attention now shifts to a different subterranean expedition. This particular odyssey, however, was not impelled by a mere thirst for knowledge or an inquisitive spirit, but rather by an affection so profound, so utterly consuming, that it audaciously sought to defy the very foundational tenets governing existence itself. This is the poignant chronicle of Orpheus, an artist whose lyrical prowess was such that his melodies could animate inert stones and pacify the most savage of creatures, and whose boundless devotion to his beloved Eurydice compelled him to embark upon an undertaking deemed utterly impossible. Orpheus, a scion of one of the esteemed 9 muses, the divine inspirers of all artistic expression and intellectual pursuit, exhibited an extraordinary aptitude for music from his earliest years. When he would draw his bow across the strings of his lyre, an instrument of exquisite beauty personally fashioned by the Olympian deity Apollo, the swift currents of rivers would perceptibly slacken their pace, seemingly pausing to absorb each resonant note. Verdant trees would incline their branches as if straining to capture every delicate sound, and even the most formidable beasts of the wilderness would settle into an uncharacteristic stillness, utterly captivated by the harmonious strains that appeared to encapsulate the full spectrum of global joy and sorrow. His compositions were not merely aesthetically pleasing, they possessed an inherent, undeniable power to transform. Agrarian communities observed that their harvests flourished with remarkable abundance whenever the distant strains of Orpheus's practice drifted across the fields. Pastoralists discovered that their flocks remained exceptionally tranquil and robust when his enchanting melodies wafted over the undulating hills. Even within the bustling confines of urban centres, citizens reported that communal disagreements found swifter resolution, and the weight of daily responsibilities felt significantly lighter on those auspicious days when Orpheus graced the public squares with his performances. Yet, despite the immense solace and exhilaration his extraordinary music bestowed upon countless others, Orpheus himself frequently wrestled with a profound sense of solitude. He possessed the singular ability to sway vast audiences, moving them to either heartfelt tears or joyous laughter, inspiring them to acts of profound kindness or audacious bravery. Nevertheless, his heart yearned for a kindred spirit who could comprehend not merely the intricate beauty of his compositions, but also the very essence of the individual who crafted them, someone who perceived him as more than a mere conduit for exquisite sounds. He ultimately discovered this profound connection in Eurydice, a graceful wood nymph whose inherent talents complemented his own in a remarkably perfect synergy. While Orpheus could effortlessly weave melodies that articulated every conceivable human emotion, Eurydice possessed an innate, intuitive communion with the natural world, enabling her to discern layers of meaning within his compositions that eluded others. She could listen to a single melody and unerringly deduce whether it had been conceived amidst the blush of dawn or the fading light of dusk, whether he had been observing majestic eagles in flight or shimmering fish in their watery dance, or whether his spirit had been brimming with optimistic hope, or touched by a gentle melancholy. Their courtship unfolded with the gentle, unfolding beauty of a prolonged, exquisite song. They would often wander hand in hand through dense forests, where Orpheus would play his lyre softly, while Eurydice, with her keen perception, would highlight the distinct ways various creatures reacted to different musical phrases. She meticulously instructed him on the art of integrating natural sounds, the melodic calls of birds, the whispering rustle of wind through leaves, the soothing murmur of water flowing over stones, into his intricate compositions. In turn, he illuminated for her how the complex tapestry of human emotions could be expressed through the nuanced interplay of rhythm and melody in ways that mere words could never adequately convey. Their nuptials were celebrated with unparalleled splendor, graced by the presence of both Olympian deities and mortal beings. Apollo himself provided the ceremonial music for the occasion, though he humbly conceded that his own playing seemed rather unadorned when compared to the magnificent artistry his protégé had achieved. The 9 muses collectively attended, each contributing her unique artistic gift to ensure the celebration was nothing short of perfection. Hymen, the venerable god of marriage, bestowed his sacred blessings upon their union, offering fervent prayers for an enduring happiness and a shared journey of creative expression. For a cherished, albeit fleeting period, their shared existence embodied every aspiration they had ever harboured. They constructed a modest dwelling nestled within a secluded grove, where the natural acoustics were perfectly suited for musical creation. Their mornings commenced with Orpheus immersed in composition, while Eurydice diligently tended to her flourishing garden, each partner acutely attuned to the other's rhythmic activities, their separate endeavours weaving together a harmonious tapestry far grander than either could have achieved in isolation. Evenings were devoted to the joyous exchange of the day's discoveries. A newly conceived melody Orpheus had meticulously crafted, or an intriguing, unfamiliar bird call Eurydice had painstakingly learned to imitate. However, their profound felicity did not escape the notice of certain onlookers, not all of whom harboured benevolent intentions. Aristaeus, a minor deity who had long harboured a covetous desire for Eurydice, observed their serene contentment with an escalating sense of bitter resentment. Prior to her marriage, he had frequently offered Eurydice lavish gifts and persistent attention, and her gentle yet resolute rejections had inflicted a wound upon his pride far deeper than he was willing to acknowledge. One fateful afternoon, while Orpheus was away engaged in a consultation with fellow musicians, Aristaeus seized the opportunity to approach Eurydice in her secluded garden. His initial overtures of conversation were met with polite but unequivocally firm rebuffs. When his persistence escalated as he brazenly suggested that she merited a husband far superior to a mere musician, Eurydice instinctively began to retreat, moving swiftly towards the protective embrace of the forest, hoping to elude him amidst the dense foliage where her agility surpassed his. In her desperate haste to evade his unwanted advances, she tragically stepped upon a venomous serpent that lay concealed within the tall, verdant grass. The resulting bite was instantaneous and irrevocably fatal. By the time Orpheus returned and discovered her lifeless form, her spirit had already embarked upon its inexorable journey to the underworld, leaving behind only the diminishing warmth of a physical vessel that no longer harboured the essence of the spirit he so deeply adored. Orpheus's subsequent grief was an unparalleled phenomenon, unlike anything the mortal world had ever witnessed or endured. His lamentations were so utterly heartbreaking, so profoundly imbued with sorrow, that they actively disrupted the very fabric of the natural order. Trees prematurely shed their leaves, casting them down out of season. Rivers, as if mirroring his anguish, swelled and overflowed their banks, their waters appearing to weep alongside him. Wild animals, rather than being drawn by the erstwhile beauty of his music, emerged from their secluded sanctuaries, compelled by a sorrow so pervasive and immense that it seemed to resonate with every creature that had ever experienced the profound void of loss. For countless days Orpheus remained immobile, seated beside Eurydice's grave, playing mournful melodies that articulated the very depths of his unbearable anguish. Yet, imperceptibly, an audacious new concept began to coalesce within his tormented mind. His music had consistently demonstrated its capacity to achieve the seemingly impossible. Why, then, should the insurmountable barrier of death be any different from any other formidable obstacle? If his powerful songs possessed the ability to shift unyielding stones and pacify raging storms, perhaps they could also sway the hardened hearts of the formidable deities who presided over the sombre realm of the underworld. Disregarding the earnest counsel of all who knew him, Orpheus resolutely determined to descend into the dreaded domain of Hades and present a personal petition for Eurydice's resurrection. He made his way to one of the clandestine entrances to the underworld, a cavern so unfathomably deep and shrouded in a perpetual darkness that no mortal explorer had ever managed to return from its depths. Yet Orpheus entered this terrifying abyss armed only with his cherished lyre, implicitly trusting that his music would afford him protection where conventional weaponry and protective armour would prove utterly ineffectual. His arduous passage through the underworld was akin to traversing a landscape sculpted from solidified sorrow. He journeyed through cavernous chambers where the very walls perpetually wept, across rivers whose currents flowed with the ceaseless tears of the eternally mournful, and through desolate valleys where the pervasive mist was ostensibly formed from the lingering echoes of final despairing sighs. Nevertheless, wherever he ventured, his transcendent music preceded him, and the inhabitants of this perpetually shadowed realm, beings long accustomed to an existence of unmitigated sadness, found themselves experiencing a sensation they had all but forgotten, the faint glimmer of hope. Even Cerberus, the monstrous three-headed hound that ferociously guarded the formidable gates of Hades, was profoundly affected by Orpheus's heart-rending lament. Instead of launching a savage assault upon the living intruder, the colossal beast lowered all three of its formidable heads and allowed its myriad eyes to gently close, lulled into a peaceful slumber by melodies that spoke of a love so potent, so unwavering, that it transcended the very boundaries separating life from the cold embrace of death. By the time Orpheus finally reached the majestic throne room of Hades and Persephone, his extraordinary music had already heralded his arrival. The formidable rulers of the underworld sat in solemn anticipation, fully cognizant that they were about to entertain a request unlike any that had ever been uttered within the confines of their dominion. Orpheus then played for them the entire harrowing narrative of his profound love for Eurydice, their initial serendipitous meeting, the blossoming of their tender courtship, their tragically brief period of shared happiness, and his utterly devastating loss. But beyond merely recounting his personal tragedy, he performed the very music of love itself, melodies that stirred within even these divine beings poignant recollections of cherished connections, of profound losses they themselves had endured, and of the fundamental truth that caring deeply for another soul imbues existence with its most profound and enduring meaning. Persephone, who, more acutely than most, comprehended the searing agony of separation from those held dear, openly wept as she listened to his heart-wrenching performance. Hades, typically impervious to the desperate supplications of mere mortals, found himself unexpectedly recalling his own gnawing loneliness during those long, desolate months when Persephone resided in the sunlit upper world. For the first time in the entire history of their grim realm, the formidable rulers of the dead reluctantly agreed to release a soul back into the vibrant embrace of life. However, their unprecedented gift was not without stringent conditions. Eurydice would indeed be permitted to return with Orpheus to the upper world. Yet, throughout their perilous journey out of the underworld, he was strictly forbidden from looking back at her. He had to implicitly trust that she was faithfully following. He was required to possess unwavering faith in that which he could not visually confirm. He had to unequivocally demonstrate that his love was sufficiently robust to operate solely on belief rather than demanding constant tangible confirmation. The arduous journey back began with an overwhelming surge of joy. Orpheus could distinctly hear Eurydice's delicate footsteps trailing behind him. He could almost tangibly sense her comforting presence, just as he had always been able to perceive her proximity. They meticulously retraced their path through the labyrinthine caverns and desolate valleys of the underworld, steadily progressing towards the faint glimmer of light that delineated the crucial boundary between the realm of the departed and the vibrant land of the living. But as they ascended the final winding passage towards the surface, an insidious tendril of doubt began to insinuate itself into Orpheus's weary mind. The faint footsteps behind him seemed to grow increasingly indistinct. The reassuring sense of Eurydice's presence felt less certain, less palpable. What if the gods had cruelly deceived him? What if he was climbing towards the light utterly alone, while Eurydice remained irrevocably trapped in the depths below? What if his steadfast faith was tragically misplaced, and his beloved was even now being forcibly dragged back into the abyssal gloom he would never again be permitted to enter? Just as the welcoming mouth of the cave finally became visible, just as the warm, life-affirming sunlight of the upper world began to gently caress his anxious face, Orpheus's fragile faith irrevocably fractured. He impulsively turned to glance back, desperate to reassure himself that Eurydice was indeed there, and she was for but a fleeting instant. He beheld her beloved face, saw her delicate hand reaching out towards him with an expression of profound love and understanding. But in that very same agonizing moment, she began to rapidly fade, inexorably recalled to the underworld by his fatal transgression of the gods. Solemn condition. Her final ethereal words to him were not of bitter reproach, but of enduring love. She understood the agonizing doubt that had compelled him to look back, and she forgave him for the momentary lapse of faith that had tragically undone them both, even as she dissolved back into the encroaching darkness. A gentle smile imbued with the same profound understanding that had first captivated him graced her fading countenance. Orpheus re-entered the mortal realm in profound solitude, his spirit crushed by a second, even more devastating bereavement than the first. The crushing weight of this fresh sorrow was compounded by the searing knowledge that he alone had been the architect of his undoing, the direct cause of Eurydice's final vanishing. In a desperate, futile attempt, he endeavoured to retrace his steps to the cavernous entrance of the underworld, but found it had become hermetically sealed, an impenetrable barrier. The divine clemency, once unequivocally spurned by his own human frailty, would not, could not be offered to him again. For the remainder of his earthly existence he embraced the life of an itinerant minstrel, a peripatetic bard. His melodies, once vibrant with youthful passion, now carried an unparalleled depth of melancholic sagacity and profound wisdom, imbuing them with an unprecedented potency and resonance. Pilgrims journeyed from far-flung territories to hear him play, drawn not by the promise of joy or light-hearted entertainment, but because his soulful compositions served as a poignant mirror, helping them to grapple with their own personal afflictions, their individual struggles between conviction and uncertainty, and their own experiences of cherishing affections with such intensity that the spectre of bereavement rendered existence nearly insufferable. The timeless narrative of Orpheus and Eurydice has been recounted ceaselessly across millennia, echoing through countless generations, precisely because it resonates with an intrinsic, shared human condition, speaking to something profoundly universal in our collective experience. We all inevitably confront moments when we must proceed with conviction rather than absolute assurance, when the demands of love necessitate placing reliance upon what we cannot physically perceive or empirically substantiate. We are all intimately familiar with the irresistible impulse to glance rearward, to crave tangible proof and demand reassurance when we are asked to embrace belief. As consciousness wanes and you drift towards a state of rest, ponder deeply what this ancient, archetypal story might impart as profound insights into the intricate interplay of reliance and skepticism. What personal odysseys in your own life require an unshakable faith rather than verifiable facts? What interpersonal bonds necessitate an affirmation of their veracity, even when you lack palpable or empirical substantiation of their reality? Perhaps the most sublime melodies we create originate not from tangible instruments, but from the unwavering fortitude to persist in one's forward trajectory towards enlightenment or hope, even when we are precluded from verifying the continued presence of affection in our wake.